This is 3 hours of the most vindictive, unforgiving, nuclear revenge stories of the past year. Strap in, because this is the very best of what Reddit has to offer. Topsy-turvy. I started dating a girl about 7 years ago. When we met, she was getting up on her feet and trying to find her way in life. I let my imagination take over and started envisioning her potential and what kind of life we'd have together. I'd never had the feeling of disarm, punch-drunk love that I had for her, and that probably clouded my judgments. Throughout our time together, she would reach out and ask for money for things, repairing a car, paying a bill, etc. We were getting closer the longer we dated, and I'd always help her, assuming that I was making an investment in both of our lives by helping her through a period of instability. In all, I probably gave her about $15,000. After about 4 years of this, I finally popped the question. She accepted, and we were married after a brief engagement. About 6 months into our marriage, she told me she'd been having car trouble and needed about $2,000 for the repair. This struck me as a bit odd. By that time, I was more than familiar with her vehicle and knew her explanation for what the issue was didn't make sense. One evening, after she went to sleep, I went and had a look at the part of the car she had said was faulty. There was no issue, and this set off alarms. I grabbed her phone and, on a hunch, typed in the amount she'd asked for, and it returned a text message with a guy she'd previously dated. Apparently, he'd reached out and asked for help repairing his car, and lo and behold, he'd asked for the same amount that she'd requested from me. My stomach turned as the thought entered my mind that maybe I'd subsidize more of this guy's expenses across the time I dated my wife. As I read through the messages further, I realized that this guy was the Lester Diamond to my Sam Rothstein, and I'd been played like a fool. I'd spent my entire relationship as a proxy sugar daddy. I thought on this for a few weeks and tried to figure out what to do next. These sacrifices were not insignificant to me. I'd been working as a surgical resident for much of our courtship, making very little money and working long hours to form a strong, solid foundation for our future. This was devastating, and I realized that I couldn't reconcile the situation. Once I'd cooled down, I waited for an evening my wife went to bed early, and I got into her phone. I caught up on the most recent messages she and her paramour had sent one another. Then, I initiated a conversation with him. I posed as her and told him she'd been drinking, she is a recovering alcoholic, and that she needed to get some things off her chest. I didn't go overboard, but I did send messages to the effect that she was not over him and that her affections had grown since marrying me. I all but teed him up to move in for a relationship with her. I then abruptly ended the chat and asked that we not talk about the conversation again in order to avoid furthering her relapse, but that we both keep in mind what we'd spoken about and see if we could make a life together work. I then deleted the text from her phone and hoped the two would proceed forward together. They did. I kept an eye on the text for the next few months and progressively saw things heat up between them until it looked like she was committed to leaving me. We didn't have many assets together at the time as I was still finishing a surgical residency, so I knew the divorce would be quick and painless and that we'd go our separate ways and she'd start a new life with the guy whose underachievements I'd been funding. So I filed for divorce and had her served papers. I was generous with the $10,000 in assets between us in order to make the split as quick as possible, and we went on our ways to begin life anew. And you'd think that that is the end of the story, right? Oh no, friend. You see, mama didn't raise a cuck. In our states, not only are assets separated upon marital severance, but so are debts. And medical school is freaking expensive. Really expensive. $250,000 expensive. So this female dog ended up with a parting gift of about $125,000 of my student loans. And guess who she shotgun married 2 months after our divorce? Fortunately for her, she'll only have to pay half of that amount. Because if history does indeed repeat itself, he'll be paying the other half once their marriage ends as well. It was all I could do to not send them a piggy bank as a wedding gift. Best $15,000 I ever spent. Wow, I had no idea that this was a law in a certain jurisdiction of the US, but if it is, and I don't know if it is or not, this is truly a crazy story. You're telling me that yes, although you lost 15K, you actually gained 125,000? That is mental. If you guys know about where this law is a thing, or if it is indeed a thing, get in the comments down below. As you can tell, I'm just a dumb British boy, so help me out. Crazy story nonetheless. Terrible boss gets his comeuppance. Setting: high volume independent tyre shop in northern New England circa 2012. We'll call it 123 Tyre. Target: evil general manager. We'll call him Jay. Aggrieved parties: basically everybody that worked there at the time, but mainly myself and the receptionist. We'll call her Ruth. Now for the backstory. So, Jay had been the GM of 123 Tyre since he got the previous GM fired in 2004. He was and is a complete narcissist who believed he could do no wrong. And if you didn't agree with him, God help you. Over the years, Jay had done a number of illegal things. For example, he was always very physical with his employees. One time, he was wrestling with another salesman. This was commonplace and unavoidable if you valued your job, and the salesman, we'll call him Paul, took a bad fall and broke his knee. In order to avoid the ire of the owner, Lou, Jay immediately clocked Paul out and told him to go to the hospital. He also told Paul to use his own insurance and that the company would pay the deductible in order to avoid a messy workers' comp claim. Paul did as he was told and kept his job, but his knee was never the same, and he ended up addicted to opioids thanks to Jay's actions. Jay also had an affinity for the ladies. Now I must mention here that Jay is an ultra-conservative Christian father of 11 children who believes that a woman's place is uneducated, barefoot, pregnant, and in the kitchen. That being said, several female receptionists came and went over the years, with only Ruth sticking around because she needed the money and begrudgingly accepted the regular sexual harassment. When he wasn't behaving inappropriately with every lady that walked in the door, he was behaving inappropriately with every other employee. Want to leave early on a slow day? Wrestle the biggest guy in the shop for it. Jay was big on wrestling. I suspected Jay may have also been wrestling with his daughters, but I couldn't prove it. The guy was a real creep. Big guy isn't in that day? Buy him a pizza. Trying to have lunch? Expect Jay to throw food at you. Want to schedule a vacation? Tough. He'll let you know the week before if you can take it. He was a complete child, and I put up with him for 6 long years because I couldn't let him win. The setting. It was the summer of 2012, and Ruth and I had had enough. Jay was completely out of control as usual, now telling me, a Latino, that if Obama won re-election, he would make my work life heck come November. Ruth was going through a divorce and he was trying to move in on her. For the record, Ruth hated Jay's guts. It was time to hit him where it hurts. Ruth was ready to drop a lawsuit for sexual harassment on Jay and 123 Tire, and I was ready to drop one for constructive discharge. Now, suing an employer doesn't exactly look good on one's CV, but we were both at wit's end. The revenge. Ruth and I decided one evening that Jay's ultra-conservative values must be shared by his wife and family. As he was always working, his wife must be the one who goes to the mailbox every day. I created a throwaway email and got him a Bill Me Later subscription to Hustler magazine, and Playboy, and Penthouse. Fast forward a couple of weeks, and he comes in looking like death warmed over. Turns out Mrs. J didn't appreciate his new taste in reading material, and he's now living in a motel in the next town over. Now, he's not saying that his wife kicked him out. He's far too much of a narcissist for that, but I could put 2 and 2 together. He's decided that he's done with his wife and 11 children, and that he's going to start a new life with Ruth. After all, her divorce is going to be finalized at the end of the week. It was at this point that Lou's sister, co-owner of 123 Tire, and also not a big fan of Jay, we'll call her Liz, overheard him talking to Ruth in a less than business appropriate manner. Liz later took Ruth aside and got the straight poop on what had been happening for the last several years, and that was that. The next morning, Lou called Jay to his office and was far kinder than I would have been. Jay was to lose his title of GM and go to work in another 123 Tire location an hour away until the end of the year. Beginning in 2013, Jay would need to find other employments. Jay was also not to contact the location that he'd overseen and worked in for years. Also, the location that Jay was relocated to added an hour to his already hour-long commute. I suspect that Lou also encouraged Jay to reconcile with his wife, which Jay did. Okay then, now onto the epilogue where karma really hits home. Jay entered his employment with 123 Tire in January of 2013 and never suspected any involvement from me. In fact, to this day, he stays in occasional contact with me. He went on to work for another tire store, this one a corporate chain, as a store manager. He put his house on the market, bought a new one closer to his new employer, and everything. A year later, he was fired after bringing a 7-figure lawsuit on them. They settled out of court and he moved back to the house he was in before as it hadn't sold. Jay's next job was 5 minutes from his home, and his new boss was the guy that Jay had gotten fired back in 2004. That one lasted a couple of years until Jay gave up on finding employment in the area and moved himself and the whole family to the Midwest sometime around 2016. Now in the Midwest, Jay's been unable to keep a job in the car business for more than a year, and as soon as each of his kids turn 18, they seem to move right back to the area they grew up in. His New England home sold in 2019 for less than he bought it for. Ruth still works for 123 Tire and is very happy there now. The icing on the cake. In early 2021, I finally left my job at 123 Tire. I sold my house and became a full-time RVer. I've seen 47 US states, including the Midwestern state and town that Jay now resides in. I looked him up when I got there, and he came to see me after he got out of work in my new RV. He said, "Boy, you must really think something of me to look me up and want to see me all the way out here." If he only knew the half of it. Yeah, this guy is just clearly screwed. The fact that he genuinely thinks that you like him, even after he's treated you so badly for 6 years, just shows how screwed he is in the head. Like, I bet you he still doesn't even realize to this day how much people hate him. Like, he wouldn't even realize how horrible it must have been to work under him if he's the one that's saying, oh, I really appreciate you coming out to see me, man. We're such good mates. How does he not know? I have no idea. Then again, I guess if he did realize, he wouldn't do it in the first place. Yeah, great karma. Thoroughly enjoyed it. Park your car in a danger zone. Good luck finding it. This is the story of Mike. Mike managed the warehouse of a hospital. Said hospital was built in the 50s in the center of town. The stadium is on one side, the justice hall on another, and the school is on the third side. There's also a barracks and 2 other medical buildings around, so the streets are crowded with cars searching for a parking spot. One day, when opening the gate of the landing dock, Mike noticed a little car parked in the hospital internal courts, near the 2,000-litre liquid oxygen tank that you can see on screen right now if you're watching on YouTube. As you can see, it's a pretty big boy. Now, of course, this is absolutely forbidden because 1, this is a private property. 2, the court was planned before 35-ton trucks were the norm and maneuvering is already difficult. And 3, liquid oxygen is explosive. A car or a truck hitting the tank would be a major hazard. It was a small Italian car. No advertisement, but it was the kind commonly used as a second car or to travel in the Dolomite Mountains where the roads are very narrow. So Mike makes some calls. The car isn't owned by someone who works at the warehouse or one of the nursing staff. No doctor has such a small car. The reception made announcements asking visitors to move the badly parked car, but to no avail. By 6 p.m, the car is gone. Okay, problem solved. But the day after, the car is there again. The same calls happen with the same results. Mike then called the police. But the police can't tow it because it's a private place. And of course, the towing company can't do it without a police query. By chance, that day only lorries came to unload medical materials. When it's time to close the warehouse, the car is gone once more. On the third day, when the landing dock opens, the car is already there. And now it's a real problem. A 35-ton truck from Germany must come this day. There's no way it can reach the dock without tilting the car and therefore the liquid oxygen tank. This has become a clear and present problem of security. All the warehouse team exchanged ideas on what to do, but all feasible solutions have already been tried. It was only when someone from the maintenance team passed by on a forklift with a pallet of plaster bags that it struck everybody at the same time. There's no way this Italian car could weigh more than 1 ton of plaster, so Mike went and saw the forklift driver while the team searched for a wooden pallet. Slowly, with many precautions, the forklift slided the pallet under the car, lifted the whole thing, and went to drop the car off at the nearby street. In just 10 minutes, the police were warned that a car is parked in the middle of the street blocking traffic. The said car is towed in less than half an hour. Of course, the truck came in and had no problem maneuvering. 2 days later, rumors ran through the hospital. Apparently, it was the car of the director's wife. She worked in a medical building some streets away. While everybody agreed that Mike had made a good move, they waited to see what would follow. It's turned into a global problem of management. Mike is called to see the director. As soon as he goes in the door, he starts to explain, "Yes, I know it's your wife's car, but..." The director stopped him. "What? No, I called you for an entirely different matter. I warned my wife several times. She had it coming, the idiot." Until the hospital closed 20 years later, this story has been repeated to each new worker and each medical student. Put your car in a tree if you want, but don't park in the landing dock court, because Mike will make it disappear. Wow, that is so good from the director. I reckon Mike thought he was in massive trouble as well. He did something that was completely fair, I've got to say, and I'm sure he would have been okay, but nonetheless, when you do something like that and you realize it's a director's wife's car, you must be thinking, oh, I've messed up here massively. Even though what you did was completely fair, you're still thinking, oh, I'm in big trouble. But the fact that he was just like, no, I told her multiple times she's an idiot for doing that. Anyway, let's talk about something else. Good man. Unlike the previous story, that is a boss that you want to work for. What a good guy. Now, if you were looking at the screen, reading along with the story as I narrated it, you might have seen that this is clearly not written by an English-speaking person, or at least English is not their first language. And as a result, I was kind of having to paraphrase at points. But I've got to say, one thing that I did change, which maybe I shouldn't have done, is the phrase, "park on a tree if you want." I mean, can that just become English? Because that is elite. So I just get it completely accurate. Put your car on a tree if you want, but don't park in the landing dock court. Yeah. Get that into my lexicon right now. How I screwed over a racist, horrible, bigoted business owner and likely resulted in him going out of business faster. This occurred in a southern state. I won't mention the state because, well, you'll see. I was an account manager for a digital marketing company. We sold lead generation services to business owners to generate leads. One of our key selling features was if you turned on call tracking numbers and recorded phone calls, we'd guarantee you X amount of leads based upon Y spend. And if we failed to meet that, you'd be entitled to partial, or if we really failed, potentially a full refund. Some things quickly to note about advertising. CTN stands for call tracking number. It's a unique number that's assigned to a certain point of advertising that consumers call. This number is only on that piece of advertising. It routes to the business line, and unless the consumer is very observant, they have no idea they are using a CTN. Call recording. If you turn on CTNs, we can record the calls and store the audio on our servers. The business has to consent to this. Also, when you call, you'll hear a message, "This call is recorded for quality assurance" type of thing. Both of those are required to be eligible for our service guarantee. Storytime part 1, the lay of the land. The business in question was a small dad and son contracting company with a couple of employees. They primarily focused on smaller jobs such as windows, drainage, finishing, etc. Unfortunately, this business owner was a royal pain in the butt. He went back years and his account was filled with nothing but complaints. Also, there was a strong suspicion that he was racist because his last account manager was black. The business owner, who we will name Scott, refused to ever meet in person with the previous manager. Also, I was white and he had no issues finding the time to sit down with me and tell me how trash our service is. Well, it's coming up to do contract renewal and he says we aren't producing his leads and he wants to put in a claim for failing to meet our service guarantee. I spoke to my manager about this and he said he wants me to listen to his calls, write a detailed report and present my findings to him. The manager is worried this may end up in court due to the dollar amounts involved. Nearly a whole working week of hours later, I probably spent dang near 40 hours on this, and I wrote a detailed 24-page report outlining the results of our advertising. To say I shred this business owner's business practices is an understatement. The report was a straight-up attack on his poor customer service skills, disorganization, inability to execute, and complete and total failure of anything resembling any sense of standard business practices that just make logical sense. I will share with you a few examples of the types of calls I listen to. Small calls where multiple phone calls are truly epic in their total incompetence. Customer 1. This one was a small-time landlord who had 3 different properties that had received a quote from Scott for work. The landlord had accepted Scott's quote and agreed to do business. In one voicemail message, he offered to pay a deposit to start work. Throughout 4 voicemail messages, this poor landlord went from, "Hey, I want to pay you," to "Are you okay?" to "Why the frick aren't you returning my calls?" Yes, I said voicemails. Scott had gone out to this man's properties, quoted his pricing, and then straight up refused to do anything more. Why? I legit got no idea. I called the customer in question and said I was the quality assurance agency and was doing a survey on Scott's performance. The guy ended up paying Scott's competitor about 15% more to do the work and was utterly beside himself on why Scott ignored him. I was also confused. FYI, all my calls were recorded and put into the company records. Customer 2. This one in particular really annoys me. Again, the public housing office called Scott to get a quote on work that involved 25 different homes. Scott was kind enough to answer the phone this time, which ironically was one of the few frickin' times he ever answered the phone. Initially, Scott sounded happy to get such a big, profitable job. Then Scott learned 2 things. It was Section 8 housing, and it was a neighborhood that was black/Hispanic. Immediately upon learning this, Scott informed the housing office that unfortunately he's super booked, not true, and that this area is actually out of his service area, again not true. The housing office was confused and was like, "So you're not interested in bidding?" And Scott said, "No, I'm not," and hung up. He didn't even say goodbye. So I did a quality assurance call to the housing office and the lady was completely confused why Scott wasn't even remotely interested in the job. Luckily for Scott, the lady didn't connect that Scott was a racist idiot because discrimination against protected class is a crime. Customer 3. It was an overseas phone number from Japan. A service member stayed up late to call Scott during his business hours. This person told Scott he was deployed overseas. Still, over the weekend, someone broke into his home back in the States, where Scott operated out of. He was trying to arrange for a new door. He mentioned this was an emergency as his wife was being forced to stay at a hotel. Scott never returned his calls nor made any effort to contact him on the email he provided, or called the wife, who was local. It was a super easy job that Scott could have done in about an hour or so and made a solid profit. I think that's enough examples. Yes, I completely agree. Remember, guys, that Scott is trying to get a refund from this company because they haven't generated him enough leads, allegedly, whereas clearly we can see from all these examples they absolutely have. Scott is just being lazy and not even doing his job. So then, part 2, review and plan. The actual report at the end said out of the X phone calls, Scott failed to properly service the leads in about 70% of the cases, and that I could keep on going on. Still, I felt that after X number, there was a clear trend that had been established. It wasn't that our service wasn't producing leads for Scott, it was that Scott was a racist, bigoted idiot who everyone freaking hated. Obviously, I said that in more professional language. When I presented the report to my manager, he looked at it and went, "Dang, 24 pages. I asked if it was fine, and he smiled and said, "I got a pretty good idea of what this is going to say." He said he'd review it and get back to me. So a day later, he came to me and said he'd gone over the report. The VP had gone over the report, and he asked what I thought the recommended course of action should be. My recommendation? Remove all discounts, charge Scott total price for our services, and clearly explain to him that our job is to provide him with leads. It's his job to sell those leads. If he can't convert our leads into business, that's not our problem. Scott was getting a 70% discount. Our price was built with discounts in mind. My manager was like, he'll probably cancel. And I asked my manager, and is that a problem? If Scott was going to remain my client, he was going to pay dearly for that privilege. If he wasn't willing to pay, I was very happy to let him walk. My manager smiled and said, nope. Part 3, the meeting. My manager and I called Scott and arranged a meeting. I created a PowerPoint summarizing my findings. About a third of the way through, Scott gives in and tells me to get to the point. I knew this was going to be a heated meeting, so I wanted my manager present both as support and a witness. So I explained to Scott that it's our job to bring him leads and it's his job to sell them. His failure to do that is not our problem. He gets irritable and angry, and my manager backs me up. He goes, fine, I'll renew my contract at the same rates. To which I go, yeah, you see, you didn't let me get to that part. We have new pricing for you. Scott goes, lower? I go, oh no, not lower. My manager smirked. Scott asked me for the new rates. I hit him at the full rate, which was 3 times what he was paying. Scott is furious with me, says I'm overcharging him, says I'm ripping him off, says I'm a horrible salesperson. He tells my manager I should be fired for treating him like this. My manager looks at me, and I've been waiting for the moment. Truth be told, I gave 0 Fs what Scott thought of me. If anything, my goal was to get him to cancel. Scott, I say, you're a challenging client. Therefore, the pricing of our service needs to reflect the challenge of providing you service. So we will be charging you our full rate. If you'd like, I'd be happy to go over why this ROI still makes sense based upon our past performance. This was wording I'd gone over with my management before using it. My manager felt it was fine. It felt so amazing to say those words. It was the nicest way that I could say, you're an idiot. If I'm gonna work with you, it's gotta be worth my while. Scott says we're a bunch of greedy frickin' pricks. He says, I'm gonna cancel. To which I said, that is an outcome we've decided is acceptable if that's what you choose to do. Scott huffs and goes, and what about my refund? Dismayed, I go, Scott, we've clearly demonstrated we did our part. The reason why you aren't bringing in sales is because of your company's inability to close on the leads we generate. To which Scott goes, so you're saying I don't know what I'm doing? To which I say, Scott, if you agree to sign at the new rates, I'd be happy to sit down with you and help you free of charge on how to improve your sales techniques and close more of your leads. This is me telling him he doesn't know how to run his business and was very much meant as an insult. Scott goes, nah, F you, I'm calling my lawyer. I go, so I take you're not going to renew? He goes, F no. My manager goes, that's fine. Would you like us to email you our report on your leads? Scott goes, sure, I'll show my lawyer. FYI, we never heard from Scott's lawyer. We wish Scott a good day and he leaves. Later, we wrote him an email, attached the report, and also told him if his lawyer would like the recording in question, we can send that file over as well. Our bases were covered, and we knew it. I suspect he also came to the same realization, but he had too much pride to admit that. Part 4. Make sure that dagger is nice and deep. A few weeks go by, and my manager says that we've got to shut down Scott's account, so I need to call him and ask him what he wants to do with his CTN numbers, which we control. In our contract, we say at the end of the agreement, the customer has the right to have the numbers ported over for a fee. It would have been normal to waive the fee as a gesture of goodwill, but Scott desired 0 goodwill, and he received what he desired. I tell my manager there's no way I'm porting the numbers for free, and just like his quote, I'm charging him full rate, $15 a number. The total came out to just a bit over over $100. So I call Scott. I get his voicemail, but he doesn't answer. I write him a registered letter, and in that letter, I outlined he has 30 days to respond. We have his CTNs, and if he's willing to pay a $15 per number port fee, we'll transfer those numbers over to his phone provider. One morning, I woke up to about a dozen hateful text messages in which Scott told me to go frickin' burn in hell. I took that to mean that Scott wasn't interested in porting over his phone numbers, and I reviewed those texts with my manager. We saved those messages and uploaded it to his accounts. So, is that all? Of course not. Part 5. But wait, there's more. So here I was with 7 CTN numbers that had been in service for literally years. Those 7 numbers were saved in Scott's customers' phones, and to many of Scott's customers, those numbers were Scott's number. Obviously, they wouldn't be advertised to anyone, but that doesn't mean they won't produce phone calls. Now, if I just let the numbers die, the customers will call and simply be told this number is no longer in service. Now, I'm not entirely sure if what I did here was legal, but it's been quite a few years, so I feel comfortable about introducing you to Bobby. Bobby was another southern boy, but as much of a butthole as Scott was, Bobby was a sweetheart. His mum would bake me pies for our meetings, he was a complete joy to work with. Bobby also owned a similar business to Scotty, but Bobby's business was more advanced, did more types of jobs, and also serviced the same area. So, I submitted a service request to port all of Scott's 7 CTNs to Bobby's accounts, and I waived the fee. All of a sudden, hundreds of Scott's customers would think they were calling Scott, but they'd get Bobby. Bobby had all his calls routed to his secretary, Ashley, who was an angel. Ashley was also a wickedly talented saleswoman, and I know for a fact she'd be able to take Scott's clients and convert them for Bobby. So that's what I did. I had those 7 CTNs ported over to Bobby. This did a few things that benefited nearly everyone involved. 1, Bobby got more business. 2, I produced more leads for Bobby, which means Bobby was comfortable with spending more money with me, which meant I made more money. And 3, Scott's old customers got a better service. And finally, part 6, capitalize on my revenge. At the next performance meeting with Bobby, Bobby was very pleased with the sudden uptick in new customers. He even asked me, "What did you do to my account?" I smiled and said, "I reviewed your account and made a few tweaks. Have you seen any improvements?" He absolutely did. He asked me, "Did this cost me anything extra?" I go, "Nope." He ended up increasing our spend with us by about 40% on additional services after that. I googled Scott's business about a year later. He wasn't in business anymore. I wonder why. No, my company never caught on to me porting over the numbers, and I strongly suspect our legal department would not have been pleased. And there we have it. What a story. I thoroughly enjoyed that. If you did stick with it, and I hope you guys did through the beginning, which I admit was a little bit technical, then you got that lovely wholesome revenge at the end, which genuinely is one of my favorite revenges that I've seen in a long time. Like, it wasn't incredible. Nothing amazing happened. There wasn't an insane amount of karma, but it was taking clients from a bad man and giving them to someone that deserved them. That's lovely. And yeah, you're probably right, OP. Maybe it was illegal. If anything, it's definitely not, good practice to do that because you waived a fee, didn't tell your company about it, etc., etc. Nobody found out means, yeah, you knew you were doing something wrong. But were you really though? That's my question, because if something is morally right, is it wrong at all? Like, imagine being Bobby in this situation. You're a hardworking dude, you employ good people, you do a great job, you like working with OP's company anyway, and then you're like, what's happening here? I'm getting even more stuff. You don't have to tell him about how you're doing this. You don't have to charge him for it. Brilliant. And then eventually it benefits you because he buys 40% more additional services anyway, so your company's not going to be mad, are they? Even if they never found out what you were really doing. Love the story. Scott's an idiot. You did really well. Pervy ex-stepfather gets his just desserts. A nuclear revenge tale that took 15 years to pay off. My ex-stepfather, I refuse to acknowledge that he married my mother, and since my mother is deceased, I shouldn't have to anymore, is an awful man. My mother married him because she thought I needed a man in my life to help raise me. He was abusive verbally and was just a toxic person to be around. Even when my mother and he divorced, he still insisted on trying to see me, and I had to be forced to go and see him and his new wife every other weekend. When I moved away from the city he was in, due to me ending up in foster care, I didn't bother looking him up, nor trying to find out if he was even still alive. So, when I moved back in 2008, I was kinda surprised to find out that he was still alive. When I moved back to the city, I'd worked my butt off and bought my first car, a 1992 Buick Regal Custom. I loved that car, and I also loved helping people out, which was easier with a car. Well, my ex-stepdad knew about the car because he'd seen me driving around town, running errands for the local homeless shelter where I volunteered, taking guys to the doctor's office when they didn't want to take a bus, stuff like that, and he was a resident at said shelter. Through my volunteer work at the shelter, I befriended a couple of young guys who had landed on hard times and were just working odd jobs to save up some money to move back to their hometown, the same town I'd moved back to the city from. After hearing about this and their plans to just get a Greyhound down there, I told them no, that I'd actually drive them for like $40 in gas, saving them about $250. We made arrangements and set a date for their departure. Apparently, my ex-stepdad heard about this, so he cornered them in the shower that night, told them that he was gonna have his way with them, and that I would be expecting the same kind of payment when I got them to that town. When they refused, he threatened to kill them, so they finally accepted. When I pulled up to pick them up the next morning, I can tell the air was off, like something had happened. Yesterday, these two guys were eager to leave the city behind, and now they treated my car as if it had live vipers in the passenger seat. So I asked them what was up. They told me they didn't know about leaving the city with me, and I assured them it would be fine, not knowing what my ex-stepdad had done the night prior. After a little coaxing and me mentioning that the Greyhound doesn't even run to where they were trying to go, they loaded up my truck and off we went. I could feel the tension in the car, and it had become so thick that you could slice through it using a hydrojet. After we crossed into the neighboring state, they asked me if I could just drop them off at a hotel, and they would try to find another way of going to where they were going. I said I didn't mind, but I wanted to know what brought on the sudden change of plans. After a tearful choking up in the back seat, they told me what had transpired the night before with my ex-stepdad, and I saw red. Oh, I absolutely despise this man. I wanted to. No, I needed to hurt him. But how? After assuring the two boys that they were going to be fine and that I wasn't even about to put them through what he did, they finally allowed me to take them all the way to their town. I instructed them to file assault charges against him and to make sure they submit DNA samples to the police, and they assured me they would. On the way back, I plotted my revenge against him, and that's when it dawned on me. My ex-stepdad was a registered offender for some stupid night when he was 16. He had told me before that he was caught urinating on an elementary school swing set as a youth and had to register. That was the main reason I ended up in foster care to begin with, something about child endangerment, bureaucratic BS. I also know that he didn't register in our state for the last couple of years, because had he done so, he would have been kicked out of the shelter he was staying in, since they do a 3 times a day, 7-day a week community outreach meal for not only the residents, but those who need a hot meal that day, which would also include children. So on the way back, I informed the Office of Admission staff that they had an offender in their shelter, and if they didn't get him out, I would report the shelter to the police. They had one of those safe spot stickers designating the shelter as a safe space for kids. Did I forget to mention that this shelter also ran a youth summer camp and had a youth correctional facility and the library right next to it? They took action almost immediately, but when they went to a victim, he was nowhere to be seen. He'd taken off, not to be seen again, or so I thought. You see, when he vanished from the shelter that day, he thought the safest place to hide out was in his hometown, 9 states away. A smarter person would have looked up what his registration entailed and would have known that fleeing across state lines without informing law enforcement is a felony, and it doesn't just stop at the state one left, but carries over to every state between point of origin and destination. So he had over 9 felony charges against him just for that little jaunt. Fast forward to about 3 months ago, I get a message from the two boys on Facebook asking me for my new number. I give it to them and I'm almost immediately put in touch with a county sheriff who had a federal agent in his office asking if I knew where my stepdad was. As I was telling both gentlemen that I didn't have a clue, my Facebook pinged. It was my ex-stepdad's wife telling me to give her husband a chance to reconcile. I couldn't believe it. A quick look on her page revealed that they were together, living in my hometown, and what's more, seriously, future Darwin Award winners here, they were living next door to the school he was caught urinating on all those years ago. I relayed that information to both gentlemen and asked them what charges they had on him. They said they had 2 counts of statutory on him and 3 counts of felony evasion. I mentioned his failure to register and that the day he'd left my hometown, he'd ran to his hometown 9 states away. The county sheriff informed me that he was calling from that county and he wasn't aware of the failure to register charges, but thanked me for informing him. Ladies and gentlemen, that dirtbag that nearly ruined my life, my trust with other people, and my reputation in my hometown was finally getting what is owed to him. 25 to life for everything, and isn't eligible for parole for another 17 years if he lives that long. He is better off rotting in the depths of Tartarus for the lives he ruined. Wow, what an incredible start to the episode. I mean, I don't even need to say this, but yeah, what a truly horrific monster this guy is. The thing that springs to mind right now is, do you reckon he's lying about when he was 16 and urinating on the swings? Do you think actually it was a lot worse than that and he's not telling the truth? I guess the only way to really know is to look up the case yourself. That would be very interesting. Part of me thinks that it might have been worse. I guess the only positive from this entire story is that he is locked up for life, it seems. But the lives that he's ruined, I mean, is that even justice? I don't even know. Wow, what a start. Let's carry on. Put prawn viruses on our computer, get kicked out by Mama Bear. This happened years ago. I believe I was around 9 or 10. My mum was dating this jerk. We'll call him Jay. He was never the best to me and my little brother. Lots of physical and emotional abuse from that man that went on behind the scenes when my poor mother was never home. Jay had a prawn problem, I guess, which led to many viruses on our computer my brother and I shared with the man. My brother and I tried our best to get rid of them, considering how young we were, but one day we were just getting home from school. Mum picked us up, brought us home, and we decided to jump on the computer and play some Roblox, the early 2010s. But we were rudely interrupted by one of those pop-ups. My mum heard and marched over, looked through the search history, and found several prawn sites. She got rid of them and let us continue playing on the computer. I guess she was waiting for Jay to come home from work or from the liquor store to chew a piece off of him. We heard my mother screaming at him, saying she'd pack up his stuff and send it off on a Greyhound to his hometown if she saw it one more time. Now, me being a conniving 9-year-old thought, why not give myself the best birthday present, and quickly plotted a plan. So I would sneak onto the computer before school and simply go onto Pornhub. I closed the tab but left the search in history and went to school. I was waiting to get home, and all I knew was that my mum would use the computer eventually. Finally, we got home. It was a half day, so mum had to get off of work early to drive us home. Again, like clockwork, it was back to Roblox and music. I checked the search history and called mum over. She saw the search and her face went red. She looked at us and told us to help her pack Jay's stuff. A few hours later, it was all packed up and at the Greyhound station. It was sent to one of his relatives' place. We returned to the house and gave him his ticket before we dropped him off at the Greyhound. My mum was so happy. She never knew what happened until 2 years ago when she was asking about a certain thing that happened during her and Jay's relationship. She looked at me and smiled. She thanked me, and we both ended that topic with, "He's a jerk." Yep, genius. That is crazy. One Google search, deleting the tab, just leaving it in the history, knowing what you've done has ruined this guy's life. Fantastic stuff. And let's be honest, he kind of brought it upon himself, but still, great from you. It is a bit strange though, like the fact that your mum was really happy that you got caught suggests that she was just looking for an excuse to get rid of him anyway. So she should have probably got rid of him earlier than she did. And then even years later when she was like, "Oh, you did it? Okay, cool. I don't really care. I'm happy." That's a bit weird. Do it yourself rather than waiting for something to happen. But apart from that, great revenge. Let's move on to the final story of today's episode. Trashy bosses F around and find out. I had a job working warehouse/delivery for a store. The entire corporate structure was built on treating the people below you like trash, and that was passed down through every level. Managers would just bark orders and complain at you for any reason they could think of. They paid about 25 cents over minimum wage, and the bosses drove BMWs and Mercedes. The big boss lived in an $8 million house. Our store was the freight hub for 4 others in the little chain, so we got to know the drivers from the other stores well, as they were always coming to load freight or drop stuff off. One day, we're sitting with 2 drivers from another store, and Buddy remarks that he and his partner are working over 60 hours per week. I say he must be doing okay with all that overtime pay, but he says they're not getting overtime, just paid a straight time rate. I asked him if he signed an averaging agreement, and he says no. He shows me his pay stub, and there it is. His partner comes back and confirms all of this, and they've been doing it for months. He'd asked his manager about overtime and been told that straight pay was just the way it worked. I tell them that's illegal, and I urge them to take it to labor relations. They're reluctant to rock the boat, figuring they'll be fired, so I drop it. We never got any overtime. Our warehouse was busy, our store was not. A couple of months later, they're in again, and Buddy's partner tells us that he and his girlfriend are moving back east, and he's giving his notice. I tell him again to file a complaint. There's nothing to lose now, so he does. A few weeks go by, and when I come in one day, there are expensive boss cars parked all along the loading dock. My workmate says something big is going down. All the managers have been summoned and are inside with a bunch of people in suits, so we wander upstairs to see what's going on. The company bookkeeper had an office in our store and handled all the payroll. He was a Chinese immigrant, a nice guy. The bosses were trying to pin this on him, saying he didn't speak English very well, which was true, and had obviously therefore screwed everything up. It turns out he was a pretty cagey guy. He knew what they told him to do was illegal, and he was able to produce all the records of him telling them that, and of them telling him to basically just shut up and do it. He hands it all over to them and quits. I see Buddy with a new partner a few weeks later. He's got a pay stub for about 15 paychecks worth of earnings. The company got caught for all the overtime pay and a pretty substantial fine on top of that. Added bonus, the second in command had driven over a nail when he parked his silver BMW on the loading dock and had a flat when he came out of the store. He opened his trunk and called me over and said, "Change that for me." I told him, sorry, that's not my job, and if I hurt myself, my compensation claim would be denied. As he went in to call a tow truck, I stood on the loading dock and gazed upon all the havoc I'd wrought, and my heart was glad. Wow, that's actually an amazing story. The fact that OP's diligence has probably changed a lot of people's lives, if anything, given them a lot of money that they deserved, and destroyed this company, it's just brilliant to see. Can you imagine being OP in that last sentence, just looking around you and thinking, you know what, I've done this. Everything right now is just completely effed, and it's all because of me, all in the name of justice. Good people getting what they deserve, and bad people that have done bad things getting proper punishment. You love to see it, and that is why I love this subreddit. Why we don't see Uncle Mark anymore. So, this was told to me by my dad over a drink recently. He'd gotten a little drunk and ended up admitting it to me. Said it's been too long now and he'd paid the consequences, so there was nothing to come back on him. Only reason I'm posting this. Uncle Mark was my favorite uncle when I was a child. He always invited me around to show me his airsoft gun collection, hide and seek parties with my friends, and even took us to the beach. He would always come with sweets for us and acted like one of us, another child who just wanted to have fun. But then came the day that I, a 7-year-old, was meant to be going around because we were going for a ride to this amazing place. My dad was happy and cheerful for the entire day. He was going on about how much he loved the fact that his brother wanted to be in his children's life, until he got a call. I was in my room, packing my stuff, when I heard the most blood-curdling scream from my dad. He was screaming and raging. I heard him rip open our front door and slam it back shut with enough force to make the picture next to it fall off the wall. I didn't see my dad for a long while after that, and he never told me why until we had this talk, but that should be explained at the end. Mum had a lot of money saved up from a minor lotto win, so we were okay, and she always smiled and said, "Daddy is just away for a little while because he was looking after me and my siblings," whenever I asked where he was. Uncle Mark didn't come around either during this time, but we did see him in town a couple of times. Funnily enough, he ran away the moment my mum saw me waving at him. 9 months later, Dad came home, and I excitedly ran and hugged him. He hugged me right on back with a good squeeze. We had a party to celebrate him coming home. We had party food and cake and all the usual stuff. I was just happy my dad was home though. A week or so later, Dad sat me down with the other children and explained that Uncle Mark wouldn't be coming around anymore. When asked why, he just said Uncle Mark was a bad person, and that if he ever tried to talk to us, we were to ignore him and come find one of them. We all agreed, because my dad always knew best after all. One day, a year or so later, I was 9 at this point, I'm coming out of school to wait for my parents to pick me up. My other siblings were either at secondary school or too young for school, so it was just me. And I see Uncle Mark stood there with a big grin. I get nervous when he comes up to me, saying he's here to take me for a ride. I tell him I'm not supposed to talk to him, that he's a bad person, like my dad said. Uncle Mark got this scary look on his face for a second, then told me it was all good, and his parents had changed their mind and made to take my hand. That's when I saw my dad just appear. My dad punched Uncle Mark right in the face, and little old me saw blood fly as Uncle Mark went sprawling. I didn't see much after that, except Uncle Mark running away with my dad chasing him. He came back after a little while, sighed and took me in a hug. He told my mum to take me home and that he'd see us later. I don't know why, but I knew there and then it would be a long time before I ever saw my dad again. And I was right. 5 years. 5 years my dad was gone. My mum eventually admitted to us that he was in prison for protecting us, and we'd all guessed he'd done something to Uncle Mark. And he had. Turns out Uncle Mark liked kids. He liked them a lot. And that day I was meant to go to his house, my aunt, Uncle Mark's wife, had called my dad and told him she'd found some pictures under her and Mark's bed of children. And she was scared of what to do because Mark was a big man, and it was later revealed he abused her, so she was scared to call the police on him. And my dad had gone into a rage and stormed over to his house. He'd smashed in the door to find Uncle Mark screaming at my aunt as she waved the pictures around in hysterics. My dad had beaten Uncle Mark within an inch of his life, Uncle Mark screaming he'd make him pay as the police arrested my dad. The messed up thing was, by the time my dad had explained why he'd done it, Mark managed to get the pictures, burn them, and scared his wife into saying nothing, so there was no evidence. My dad was sent down for assault, but made sure my other uncles and older cousins were around to protect us in case Mark came back. But oh no, Mark waited until my dad thought we were safe. And then, according to my dad, he'd come to kidnap me from the school right under their noses. Who would stop him? People didn't believe my dad when he explained that Mark was a predator. They thought he was just excusing himself for attacking him. After all, the police hadn't found anything, and his wife said my dad was a liar, whereas my dad was the big angry guy with a few assaults under his belt already. So all they saw was my nice uncle here to pick me up. He had gotten away from my dad at the school. My dad had tripped and it had given him a chance to run, but my dad knew where he would go. He knew Uncle Mark would run home to hide and more than likely destroy any evidence he'd gotten since destroying the last lot. He also knew the police would be on his tail for the attack on the school, so he didn't have long. The difference was though, my dad had his car while Uncle Mark was on foot. So, he drove over and demanded to know if my aunt was going to lie again after what Uncle Mark had just tried to pull. Now, I don't like my aunt much after what she pulled the first time, but I think in that moment, she really realized what a monster my uncle was. He was willing to do this to her nephew just for pathetic revenge for being called out as a predator. She said she wouldn't stop my dad or save Mark this time. My dad ordered her to get all the evidence she could as he waited for Mark to appear. She came back down with pictures. Lots of pictures. He then told her to go, wait 1 hour, and then call the police. He was ending this. And as Uncle Mark appeared, my dad, who'd been waiting behind the wall of his garden, slammed him through the door of his house, and then proceeded to beat him to death in his doorway. He apparently towards the end couldn't see the floor through the blood. My dad was arrested on murder and did so without resistance, only saying he wished they'd done his job for him. But when it was revealed that Uncle Mark was indeed a predator who'd attempted to kidnap me, and the fact that they had to face the fact that they'd allowed a predator to run free, he was instead charged for manslaughter, his lawyer stating my father had gone into a protective rage and had only intended to render him harmless. Funnily enough, no one argued in defense of the predator for my dad not getting the murder charges. He said he didn't regret it, but that he wished he'd done something else purely so that he didn't miss out on so much of my life. I told him I was forever going to be proud of him for that, and that I loved him. I was a bit shocked I wasn't told just what Uncle Mark was for so long, but my dad asked if it would have made it any better to be told as a child what he really was, or now as a man who can handle the truth. And he was right. Me as a child would not have been able to mentally handle it. I'm barely able to handle it now. Well, no doubt about it, that revenge was definitely nuclear. Oh my god. I mean, look, let me know in the comments down below. Do you think it was justified or not? I'm kind of inclined to say that what you did, Dad, was fair. To be honest, I think the fact that the murder charges were dropped and he was actually charged with manslaughter instead and only got a few years in prison shows that on the whole, it probably was just about justified. Yes, of course, horribly illegal, but still, like, you know, he did the right thing, didn't he? I mean, just think, if your dad wasn't around to protect you, if he wasn't there to pick you up from school on that day, what might have happened? Sickening to think about. All right, now moving on to our second story of today's episode. Now, this one is from r/pro-revenge, so a little less insane than the first, but still some great revenge nonetheless. I'll come back so long as Larry isn't there. To give you some background on my friend Tim, he's been programming since he was like 7 years old. Tim said by the time he got to college, he breezed through most of his comp sci classes because a lot of the content they were covering he'd already mastered years prior. Tim is an excellent programmer. Tim's career has been quite successful. He's worked for Google, Facebook, Amazon, and finally a hedge fund. The story starts at the hedge fund. Tim works a lot with AI technology, and at this hedge fund, he was the lead programmer manager who spearheaded an effort to optimize their AI that helped them complete literally millions of trades a day. To say his work had a massive impact was an understatement. All of this going on with COVID-19 in the background. Due to COVID-19, they went to a work from home model, where my friend Tim kept working. During the work from home, Tim was looking around his fancy $4,500 New York City apartment and wished for things like a yard, a heated pool, a nice 3-car garage, and not living in a high-rise. It dawned on Tim that he could now leave New York City. So Tim moved back to his hometown in Michigan, where he bought himself a really nice home with a heated pool, a 3-car garage, a nice yard, and guess what the yard had in it? A mother-in-law suite, which was essentially a 2-bedroom, 1-bath second home on the property of his main home, which he turned into his man cave. It's actually pretty sick. Oh yeah, and his mortgage payment was far less than his 4.5k a month rent, like half. Tim spent the rest of his COVID-19 work from home pounding out projects, etc. He never actually informed his employer on an official basis that he moved, he just kept working. Then COVID-19 ended. Tim's boss, Larry, calls him up and goes, "All right, Tim, on Monday we're starting work back at the office." And Tim goes, "Yeah, about that. I moved to Michigan." Larry is shocked and goes, "You didn't even ask if you could do that." And Tim basically said, "Well, I didn't know I needed your permission to move," in a sarcastic as frick way. Larry insists that Tim needs to move back to New York or he won't have a place on the team. Tim says he's been doing the exact same work from home at a high level for the past year. He's willing to travel to New York for a few meetings a year on his own dime, but he feels his quality of life is so much higher outside of New York and he has no desire to move back. To which Larry said, if Tim doesn't have any desire to live in New York, then he has no desire to keep Tim employed. Now guys, what do you think a talented senior programmer with over a decade of experience who specializes in AI technology is going to say to a response like that? If you're thinking he quits, you'd be absolutely right. He quits. Now, anyone that has done any programming knows that sometimes the best person to maintain the code is the person who wrote the code. There's logic, there's thought processes, there's so much that goes into programming that can be so individualistic, it can be hard for someone to take over a code they didn't write. 6 weeks go by when John calls Tim. Now, John is the CEO of the hedge fund. John gets Tim to agree to consider coming back. So that's when John suggests they fly Tim to New York and he sits down with John. Tim, however, flipped the switch and said, "No, how about you fly out to Michigan and we discuss this?" Tim said he said that because he wanted to establish if he was going to come back, it was going to be him working from Michigan. And if he was going to talk about his employment, it was going to be done in Michigan. John agreed, and 2 days later flew out to meet with Tim. Tim sits down and John says they really need him because he provided a lot of value to the organization and the programming team is struggling. John offers Tim the opportunity to come back with a 20% pay cut since he won't be living in New York, and John called that a cost of living adjustment. To which Tim said, "No, I want a 15% raise above what I was earning." John sits back and responds, "The reason we pay what we pay is because we ask you to live in New York, and we understand that's an expensive city to live in." To which Tim says, "You pay what you pay, and you pay it because I'm worth it. If I wasn't worth what you pay, you wouldn't be paying me. Now, my first condition is if you want me back, it will be a 15% raise." John goes, "And second?" "The second condition is I'll come back so long as Larry isn't there." John sighs, "You're asking for too much." To which Tim goes, "You don't need to bring me back if you don't want to. I'll be fine elsewhere." John says, "I'll talk to the partners." And Tim says, "My offer is good till Friday." "What do you mean?" asks John. "Next Monday is when I'm going to start looking for work. This offer is good until Friday." Now, the day that John left was the Tuesday. That Thursday, the phone rings. It's John. "Tim, we're transferring Larry to a different fund. He won't be working with you anymore, and we're fine with giving you a 15% raise. Can we send you an offer letter for you to sign?" Tim said, "Of course." "And Larry is really gone?" "Yep, you'll never need to interact with Larry ever again." That was at the start of this year. Tim hasn't been in New York and hasn't heard from Larry and hasn't seen Larry or had any communications, etc. See guys, I'm not entirely sure where I stand on this story and the conclusion for a few reasons. First of all, I don't know about you, but to me, this all seems quite petty, and Tim seems like a little bit of a petty person. Like what John is saying about living in New York is the truth. They do pay more there because the cost of living is higher. Yes, of course the work is valued at a certain price, and I understand that, but it is also true that they're paying you more to be able to live there. So you not living there, going to live somewhere else, not telling anyone, but still expecting the same, and also not expected to go back into the office when you're allowed to go back into the office is pretty weird, do you not think? Look, I get it. Clearly, he's a very good engineer, and it's important for him to remain in that role. I do just kind of think the power went a little bit to Tim's head in the story, is all I'm trying to say. Like, did Larry actually do anything wrong here? That's the question. COVID-19 ended, and he asked you to come back to work and was annoyed that you weren't living in New York. I think that's all very reasonable, and ultimately, you were the one that forced him to move positions, something that I doubt he wanted to do. So look, it's kind of on the company, I get that, because you should never give an employee this much power. And also I kind of understand it if you're thinking that Tim was well within his rights to get as much money as he could and live in a nicer place and have a more chilled life, etc, etc. Ultimately, it was the company that allowed him to do so. But overall, I don't know. Who's in the right or the wrong here? Let me know. It's an interesting one. Cheat on me and brag to your friends. Enjoy Deportation. I met this girl, 22 at the time, while I, a 30-year-old man at the time, was working in a national park, and she was a housekeeper on a work visa. We instantly hit it off, and within a month, we were in a relationship. We even had a solid long-distance arrangement where we'd visit each other on recreational visas in our respective off-seasons. I'd spend a few months in Romania or meet her at some vacation destination, then she'd spend a few months in the States. This went on for about 2 years, and eventually the conversation came up with her family about possibly moving her to the States permanently. Romania never really recovered from the Ceausescu regime, and political economic corruption makes life pretty unpleasant for a lot of people. Her marrying and moving to the US meant that her mum wouldn't have to worry about her daughter having a good life. I arranged for sponsorship and proposed to her. It seemed like my dreams were coming true. Then, about a month after she's all settled in, I get a message from her best friend back home. What followed were a year's worth of screenshots wherein she bragged about conning me into paying for her residency while she cheated on me with 8 different men. In her friend's words, "You are a good man and you don't deserve this." So, over the following 2 weeks, I reported her to ICE and Homeland Security for a conversation her brother and I had over a bottle at one point. He bragged about how he'd done time in prison for smuggling weapons to Turkish terrorists and how she'd been his lookout on several occasions. As you might imagine, in the War on Terror days, this was not taken lightly. She was immediately arrested and deported and put on a permanent no-entry terror watch list. Want to take advantage of me and cheat? Have fun never being able to come back to the States. Now look guys, I'd be lying if I said that I don't love NuclearRevenge, Supernova, Black Hole Revenge, all that stuff, you know, that involves things that are just truly mental, incredibly illegal, that sort of thing. However, there's something amazing about legal revenge like this that's just so professionally done. Nothing too drastic, just all within the law, and yeah, you got what you wanted. Legally. Okay, looking at the comments, apparently OP still hears from this person and both of her brothers, most of her cousins too, all sending him death threats, and her mum congratulating him, saying she could use a son like me. Strange. The mother's approving what you did, but the rest of the family are saying, you need to die. Franchise owner told me I was a nobody who should know her place. He doesn't have a business now. I got hired to be the manager and completely run a frozen yogurt shop after working at a different location that had different owners for years. I was promised great pay and complete control. I get there and it was a train wreck. The type of yogurt they sold you took a powder base, mixed with milk, and add flavors. The workers were just pouring straight milk into the machines. The floors under the machines literally had never been cleaned. I found an anthill under the cold topping cooler. I found mold in multiple machines. They didn't have a blender to mix the yogurt or a recipe chart for employees. The owners also owned a Subway, so the only knives they had were dull Subway knives. They had no gloves or cleaning supplies of any kind besides dish soap. I worked my butt off cleaning the store, literally spending hours with a razor scraping the years of yogurt off the floor. The owner fussed at me for doing unnecessary things on the clock and demanded that I clock out if I wanted to do that. He also only kept 4 employees at a time in the store and tried to make them all work at the Subway too, so he could just pay them that way. I refused. One of the employees he had when I got there was literally 14. The state I lived in allowed that, but had very strict rules about it. Like they can't work before 7 AM or after 7 PM. They needed to have a 30-minute break every 4 hours, etc. The owner made the schedule and I noticed that he had the 14-year-old there alone for 6 hours. I go in on my day off to order toppings and then told her she needed to clean, not just sit on her phone the whole time. She got annoyed with me, but finally did it. Then I come out of the office, clock in, and tell her she has to take a 30-minute break. She goes off on me, and I'm like, look kid, it's the law. She called the owner about it, and he immediately yelled at me that I was no one and had no authority. I have no right to make her clock out, and I needed to understand my place. So the next day I opened. I cleaned all the machines, filled them with cleaner water, not yogurt, and put them to wash cycle. I mopped the awful floor, took out the trash, then went into the office and typed up a sign with pictures I'd taken of all the disgusting things I'd seen and since fixed. I printed it out, taped it to the door on the inside so it couldn't be ripped off, locked the door, slid my keys under it, blocked the owner, and left. The sign read, "Dear customers, I apologize for the inconvenience. Due to the owner's full name, believing this is an acceptable way to keep the store and that cleaning this is unnecessary, I, a nobody who should know her place, have decided you deserve to know the disgusting state of this store prior to my employment." The store will remain closed until he tricks someone else to manage it for minimum wage after promising $18 an hour. Feel free to speak to the owner at the Subway across the shopping center. I don't recommend eating there though. I've also contacted the Department of Health and the Department of Labor for his illegal hiring of a minor without following the law and his demand that all workers here also work at the Subway so he only has to pay us Subway checks, with yogurt shop name hours added on. Corporate of both, the frozen yogurt chain and the Subway, have also been contacted over the multiple contract violations the owner has done. Apologies again for the inconvenience. If you still would like a cold sweet treat, I recommend another ice cream shop nearby. In conclusion, the yogurt shop and his Subway got closed down. Oh wow, it's clear this guy is just rotten to the core. Like, all the stuff that he's trying to do is so illegal. What's he doing? Saying, yeah, you're actually a Subway employee, but no, you don't actually work in that building. It's just easier for paperwork and I can probably pay you less. That's probably what he was going for. What a strange man. Just trying to get every possible penny out of you lot. Going against employment laws. Like, why is he employing a 14-year-old in the first place and then not having them do the stuff that is just so legal? Again, in the same way as the first story, what you're doing here is completely legal, which I love. The sign, by the way, so good. Imagine being a customer, going up to that shop and reading that. You'd be like, what the heck has gone down here? I love it. And yeah, I'm going to go to another yogurt shop, not this one. It's a really bad idea to make a government employee angry. This one is a double government employee event. And what you should know is if you get the attention of a government employee and make them angry, they will make your life a living hell. The setup is that I was working for a local county government in the permitting department that handled drainage and floodplain enforcement. I received complaints from a homeowner, a nice guy, who lived next door to a house that was part of an incorporated village. Not a nice guy. The nice guy lived in an unincorporated portion of the county, and hence the call to me as an agent of the county. I drove out to the sites and to investigate and discovered some interesting facts. The permitting agent for the village allowed the incorporated homeowner to fill his lot, affecting the drainage, which caused the unincorporated lot to flood every time there was anything more than light rain. The nice guy indicated that there was some tension between him and the not nice guy, and part of the issue was that the nice guy and his partner were a gay couple. This ran up a red flag for me, but in trying to be impartial, I took the information and some photos for the file and indicated that I would contact the village to find a resolution. I wrote a letter and then called the village inspector, Jackwagon, to discuss. I was told by Jackwagon that the village could do as it pleased, and that I could do nothing to stop the not nice guy from doing as they pleased, as it was approved by the village. There was then a comment about those type of people, the gay couple, making complaints just to cause trouble. I was now on the case, and it was time to make sure everything done on the incorporated lot was 100% legal. At this point, the game certainly was now on, because if there's one thing that grinds my gears, it's bullying. Well, hey, I go one step further than that. It's not just bullying, it's also homophobia. I went back out and spoke to the nice guy to let them know what I was up to, and also that I was not going to let this slide. I then started investigating the elevations on the two lots and what fill had been placed on the incorporated lots. The not nice guy came out and started getting belligerent about my presence and ongoing investigation. He incorrectly stated that I did not have jurisdiction over his lot and that he would be calling the police. I patiently listened and then pulled out my two-way radio and requested that the home base dispatch both a village and a county police unit to the location. I then indicated that since there was a regulatory floodplain on his lot, I did in fact have jurisdiction, and that I would be exercising my right to determine the impact of his fill activities upon that floodplain. Both of the police units showed up and I let them know what was going on. They were both appropriately agitated to have to waste their time and let the not nice guy know that I was within my authority to proceed with the investigation. A little while later, while I was measuring things, Jackwagon showed up. He started berating me about harassing the village resident and threatening calling my boss and filing a complaint and so forth. I invited him to do so, quoting which parts of the code he should indicate I was violating. I was using marking paint to show the limits of the floodplain for the photos for the file, and what do you know, Jackwagon's shoe got painted when he tried to stop me. Obviously, he was even more angry, as was the homeowner, due to very bright orange paint in the grass in his yard. I pointed out I had done the same on the neighbouring lots, but they just kept complaining. It was actually marking chalk that comes off pretty easily. Interestingly, I found two really wrong things on the not nice guy's lot. One, there was fill placed in the floodplain, and two, a garden shed was built on the fill and partially within the floodplain. Both are a big no-no and are actually against federal law. So the course of action had two parts. First, make the incorporated homeowner remove the fill and shed from the floodplain, and two, let the nice guy place fill in their lot outside of the floodplain to counteract the fill remaining in the not nice guy's lot outside of the floodplain. I also told the nice guy it would be a good idea to run a field tile on their side to drain the water that would inevitably pond up between the two lots when it rained. Predictably, the Not Nice Guy and Jackwagon got super angry when I sent the letter out that there were violations that either had to be corrected, removed, fill and shed, or apply for a revision of the floodplain with the Army Corps of Engineers. Good luck with that. This then led to a meeting at the county office with Not Nice Guy, Jackwagon, my supervisor and myself. Quickly, things went to 11 and there was yelling by Jackwagon about abuse of power, etc. The department head came into the conference room and told them both they were wrong and that they should leave peacefully and comply or face the consequences, fines. The best part was that the Not Nice Guy had to apply for a permit, and guess who was the one to review and approve it? That's right, yours truly. Now, I was following the letter of the law, but you have to know that poor government workers are underpaid and overworked. Strangely, the permit for Nice Guy was almost immediately approved, while the Not Nice Guy had to have a very thorough review to ensure it was correct. You can make a case that I was abusing my power, but I can assure you that the timing for their review was well within accepted limits. Also, how could I be held to account that they misfiled 3 times before they finally got it right? Generally, if you behave like a civil human and came to the office, we would help you get things done properly, so the permit would go through first time. But the Not Nice Guy decided he could do it all on his own, so it took him 3 tries. Had he come to the office, I would have given him the same service as others, but he decided to take the hard route, and therefore I didn't give a single inch when it came to the submission being perfectly correct. Ultimately, the situation was resolved, but it took a lot more effort than it should have. Moral of the story, don't be an entitled homophobic jerk. Well, if you didn't know what floodplains were, guys, now you do. A lot of technical stuff in that one, but if you got through that okay, then fair play to you, and also fair play to me for reading it. I've got to say, although it was technical and what you did was great, yeah, the main issue here is that there's clear homophobia going on. I think what you're inferring is that if this couple weren't gay, then none of this would have really been an issue in the first place, which is just horrible to see in 2022. She cheated on me, so I had a threesome with her former ex-boyfriend and the guy she cheated on me with. To clear up any confusion that might come up, you have to know that I am a bisexual man. I love sharing this story because I'm still proud of it. A few years ago, my ex-girlfriend cheated on me with another guy. She then had the audacity to tell me that if I was a grown-up, I could deal with it and that she hopes we can still be friends. But she lost any feelings for me and is fully in love with this new guy now. If she hadn't said that, I probably wouldn't have made this plan. But now I had to teach her a valuable lesson. I was in a depressed state for a long time and I couldn't bring myself to delete her number, and she thought I was friends with her now. She started to send me pictures of her and her new boyfriend with laughing emojis. She didn't even care about how much she'd hurt me. And then, one day, while I went through Tinder, I found someone who looked quite familiar. Her new boyfriend. Of course, I wasn't going to tell her that her new boyfriend is on Tinder. In fact, I matched with him, which was quite surprising because I thought he was straight, and we started a conversation. He didn't know who I was. She never told him that she was in a relationship while she was flirting with him, but this was perfect. We had longer conversations, and he told me more and more about him. Over the weeks, we learned more and more about each other, and now I had a plan. I suggested that we could meet each other at a bar, and he agreed. Keep in mind, he was still in a relationship with my ex-girlfriend at that time. When we met, we had a great time, and one date became many dates. It took me a few months, but then I got him to the point where he developed feelings for me, and I was his affair. What he didn't know was that I got in contact with my girlfriend's former ex-boyfriend as well. He broke up with her because he came out as gay. I was in contact with both guys. The ex-boyfriend and I got along very well. In fact, I made him a close friend of mine. Now, in my conversations with my new boyfriend, we talked about sexual desires, and he told me that he always wanted to have a threesome, so I suggested one with the gay ex-boyfriend. I knew that he was his type because we kind of look alike, and he had feelings for me. So I asked the gay ex-boyfriend if he wanted to become the third one, and to my surprise, he said yes. I'm honestly still surprised how all of that worked out without her noticing, but it did. And then the day came where I decided to go nuclear. The 2 guys came to my apartment. I led them to the bedroom and they started talking to each other. While they talked, I took a selfie from a safe distance, close enough that she could see their faces, but far enough that they wouldn't notice. Then the action started. Of course, I'm not going to go into any detail, but dang, I enjoyed it more than anything in the world. A few days after this, I told my ex-girlfriend's boyfriend that now that I'd granted him the wish of a threesome, I wanted something in return. I told him that I don't want to be in an affair any longer, and I told him that he should either break up with her or I will break up with him. I knew it was hardcore manipulative, but I had a plan and I had the full control over him. He actually broke up with her and threw her out. I even got him to move out of his apartment to move in with me, meaning that she lost both her home and her boyfriend. But I wasn't done yet, because after that she texted me with crying emojis that her boyfriend dumped her and that she regrets leaving me. I then said, "Your boyfriend? Are you talking about this guy?" And I sent her the selfie I took. She called and texted me several times, but I ignored her. My plan was almost successful. There were only 3 things left that I still had to do. The first was that I told her mother, who hates infidelity more than anything because her father cheated on her mother with another woman. You could say, like father, like daughter. Her mother was angry, but thanked me for telling her. From what I've heard, her mother cut ties with her, but I admit that I don't actually know if that happened. And I don't think it has happened. It would be funny if it was true though. The second thing I did was dump him, because unfortunately for him, he was a cheater too, and I also hate infidelity. The last thing I did was go out with the gay ex-boyfriend. And after a few dates, we got together, and we're still a couple. In the end, I destroyed both her and the guy she cheated on me with, and I couldn't be more proud of myself. Okay, wow. I mean, like, what have I just read? You lot know that I like giving my comments at the end of stories, but sometimes, very rarely, I am just left absolutely speechless by what I've just consumed. What on earth was that? Like, from start to finish, that was mental. The twists, the turns, just everything. A truly exceptional story. I am flabbergasted. Even up until the last sentence there, I wasn't expecting that. The fact that you're now with her gay ex-boyfriend as a couple and you're still together now. What's amazing? Strange? I don't know. Just overall astonishing, really. What a way to start off today's episodes. Now, before we get into our next story, I have a very special announcement for you. After an insane amount of demand from you guys, I'm delighted to say that I've released some limited edition Not Today Karen merch. Picture this, you're out and about in the streets and a wild Karen appears and starts confronting you. What do? Well, normally you have to talk to a witch like this. However, get one of these t-shirts or hoodies on and all you have to do is simply point to it, laugh, and walk away. How easy is that? The link is down in the description if you like what you see. Go ahead, check the stuff out. I think they'd make a great Christmas present or even just a little gift for yourself. As always, it's official stuff from the very best supplier, so the quality is unmatched and it's one of the best ways to support me and the channel. With that being said, let's carry on. Pedo gets entire life ruined. I've gotten permission from my older sister to write this story. I'm not the one doing the revenge here, rather my father, uncles, and a few gang members. My parents came to the United States in 1987, coming from Zacatecas, Mexico. A few of my aunts and uncles were living here in South Central LA before my parents came. I have in total 5 siblings, 2 sisters and 3 brothers. I am the youngest, now 18 years old. My sister is 3 years older than me, so 21. She was 13 years old at the time of this story. My uncles were gang affiliated, and my eldest uncle, who is now 62, was an amazing tattoo artist. This is relevant. My dad wasn't a gang member, but was well known in our city for participating in gang activity, but he never really jumped in. One of my uncles threw a party for his daughter's birthday. Practically anyone who wanted into the party was allowed to join. I know, stupid mistake by them. Myself, my brothers and mother weren't at my party, as it was also my mother's sister's birthday, and we enjoyed being around her more. But my sisters went with my dad as they were close to my uncle's daughter. My sister was left alone sleeping in my cousin's room, since our parties always ended up going until the next morning. The door to my cousin's room didn't have a lock. As my sister was sleeping, she felt someone touching her. As she woke up, she realized it was a boyfriend of one of our older cousins, 17. The boyfriend was 19 at the time. Nothing was known beyond that until a month later when my sister finally told my mum. That's so brave of her, since she was only 13. Many people at that age keep quiet for years. By then, everyone on my dad's part of the family became aware of this, including my older cousin, the one with the pedo boyfriend. She was heartbroken but agreed on something with her dad. She set up her boyfriend into meeting up with her at a local park. My dad, along with my uncles and a few members, waited at the park at around 9 p.m. Very lonely, barely lit, a quiet park. A friend of my uncle, known as Santi, rest in peace, had a small RV in which they waited. That POS arrived at the park. That is when my dad and the rest ran up to him and started beating the heck out of him until they dragged him into the RV. Once inside, they still continued to beat the heck out of him until they arrived at my uncle's place, the one who did tattoos. Once they arrived, they took him inside when my uncle was ready with all of his equipment and gave him some new artwork all over his face, neck, head, and hands. All over, he had writing indicating that he was a pedo, including an extremely big tattoo across his forehead all the way to the right side of his head. They waited until he woke back up at around 2 a.m. They dumped him in front of his father's house, not to be discovered by neighbors until the sun came out. My father left a heavy, well-written note on the door of the POS dad's house. This led to his dad giving him his own set of beatings and finally kicking him out. Surprisingly, one of his friends let him stay with him for a while, until a month after the incident, him and 2 of his friends were found guilty of a murder charge. Apparently, the murder happened around 3 months before this whole incident. The pedo was charged with a second-degree murder along with a few other charges. He was sent up to Chino Penitentiary. 2 months in the pen, he was R-worded, beat, and finally killed by some African Americans, getting shanked 3 times in his chest by a screwdriver. We're not sure if this happened due to his tattoos indicating he was a child pred, or if it was mostly a race thing. Regardless, if any of this didn't happen, he would have still been taken to the pen due to his conviction, so my uncles and father have no guilt for this. My older cousin understandably mourned his death for a while, as it was so unexpected for him to turn out to be such a POS to this world. They were together for 3 years prior to this incident. As for my sister, she is doing well for herself, currently attending Cal State Long Beach. Well, that is good news at least, the fact that your sister is now in a better place. I mean, the fact that she said this in the first place at just 13 years old, as you said, OP, the vast majority of people in this situation, probably to be expected, don't say anything. They're so scared to even mention it to anybody, and they live with it for a long, long time, maybe forever, before ever saying anything. But the fact that she said that after just a month is incredibly brave. I mean, unbelievable. As for this dude, the child pred, what do we reckon, guys? Get in the comments. Is it fair that he had the tattoos put on him, that he went to prison and was killed, murdered? Is that justice? Some would say it is. Some would say it's a bit too far. Let me know. What do you think? For me, I'm not gonna lie. I think it's just about alright. They screwed me out of my pay. I screwed them out of their company. Many years ago, I got a job with a marketing company during phone deregulation. It was the Wild West, and a lot of small long-distance companies sprang up, all trying to get a piece of the pie. Eventually, they all got bought up by the bigger fish. But at the time, they were all paying hired gun marketing firms very well to score contracts for them to lock people in. I got a job with one of those marketing firms, a new age capitalism company that insisted we all do yoga and breathing exercises while they rang a little bell and gave us affirmations about how many contracts we were all going to sell and how much money we'd all make. The job was 100% commission, but I was always good at sales, so I looked at the pay scale and noticed that it was exponential, presumably to entice people to work hard with impossible payouts. We were allowed to work as many or as few hours as we wanted, with the payout based on your weekly sales numbers. I decided I'd give it a shot for 1 week to see how much I could realistically make before deciding whether I was willing to put up with the tasteless vegan snacks and mandatory voluntary yoga regime. For the next week, I pushed myself as hard as I could. For 7 straight days, I worked 14+ hour days every single day and used every trick and technique I'd learned doing sales to score as many contracts as I possibly could. I figured that this would tell me my maximum possible income and could decide on that basis whether to stay. At the end of the week, I'd blown everyone else out of the water. In fact, I'd not just gotten more contracts than anyone there had ever seen in a week, I'd gotten more than any of them had seen in a month. Because of the exponential scale, I realized that I was making absolutely ridiculous amounts of money, over $10,000 per week. They had never expected anyone to actually hit those kind of numbers. Coming in the next week, expecting a huge payday, I ended up with about 5% of what I expected. They told me there were problems with a lot of my contracts and that I would be allowed to fix them and submit them a few at a time over the next several weeks. These problems were things like an apostrophe wasn't quite clear or the dash in someone's phone number was slightly crooked. They were going to screw me. That night, I got a phone call from the company's office manager, Frank, who wanted to meet up for a drink. Curious, I agreed. Over beers, Frank told me that the owners of the company were in a panic because I would have bankrupted them. He said they spread out all my contracts on the floor of the office, then they crawled over them, inspecting each one, trying to figure out if I was committing some kind of fraud. When they comprehended that all my contracts were legit, they decided they had no choice but to screw me over. Frank told me he realized at that point that if they would screw me, they'd screw him too. And besides, he was tired of doing yoga. He asked me if I would be interested in going into business with him and going head to head with his bosses. I thought it sounded intriguing, but I asked him how he thought we could compete. Frank explained that he'd found out they didn't actually have the contract for our city. They were acting as independent contractors for another company who had the contract to market the service in an entirely different city. They were poaching here because the person who did have the contract here wasn't actively using it. We put together a pitch and approached the guy with the real contract, Joe, and told him about the people poaching his turf. We agreed that we'd split with him. We'd take the upfront money for each contract and he'd get the back end money down the road. It was a good deal for everyone, so Joe contacted the phone company and had them threaten the poachers with a big lawsuit if they didn't stop. A week later, Frank and I strolled into the offices of our old employer. Most of the furniture and all the yoga mats were gone, and there was just a table, a couple of filing cabinets, and a file box with the final pay envelopes for everyone. I made a show of counting my money to make sure it was all there, and the two owners, husband and wife, told Frank and I bitterly that they'd have to take cash advances on their credit cards for this money and asked me if I felt guilty for destroying their lives. I smiled and said nope and left. Our marketing company made us a lot of money over the year until the company got bought up by Sprint and the gravy train ended. Well, my friend, if you were bought out by Sprint, it seems quite unlikely that the gravy train ended. That's ridiculous. I mean, to do that in a year, very, very impressive. Fair play to you. You know what's funny is that people that do illegal things, like these two owners, who genuinely have frauded you out of 95% of the money that you rightfully made, that you were contractually obliged to, then say, when you do something legal to get revenge on them, do you feel guilty? No, obviously not. You were the one that broke the law. I stuck by the law and ruined you. Your fault. Revenge and roadkill, a love story. When I was a sophomore in high school, a new guy moved to town, Matt. Matt played guitar and I was a singer. Our love was meant to be. We started dating when I was a junior and he was a senior. I was 16, he was 17. Honestly, it was a super cute romance that would probably make a decent Wattpad story, but it wasn't meant to last as I was moving to a new state at the start of my senior year. This story takes place about 2 weeks before the end of my junior year and the school and town are getting ready for senior graduation. Matt was my first everything. Losing my virginity wasn't great, but is it ever? For everyone's sake, I hope that I'm wrong. Matt and I were awkward but managed to talk boundaries before anything happened. In this conversation, we agreed that it was really important to both of us that this stayed private. Absolutely no bragging or being weird around friends. Griffin was a senior and someone who was in our group of friends but not a close friend. We were all in either orchestra, choir and or band. Everyone in those programs ran in the same social circle. Griffin was a Christian and it was a big part of his identity while we were at school. He had this charisma or something. He used to invite classmates to his church while gently shaming all of us for not being exactly like him. Even though he was a bummer, his whatever charisma kept him active in the social scene and he was at all of the major hangouts I can remember during that time. I was friendly with Griffin because, to put it simply, I lacked confidence. I grew up in a church where I was taught that men were more important than me, to never question a man. My own mother shamed me for wearing my volleyball uniform at home because it was inappropriate and could confuse my brother. Screwed up doesn't begin to cover that church or the amount I had to unlearn. By the time I was 17, I was fully done with church, but still struggled with all I'd been taught. It was a confusing time. Griffin knew this, and his self-assigned senior project was getting me back to church. I'm 99% sure it was only about getting Matt involved, because Griffin also wanted Matt to be a Christian, but had so far been massively unsuccessful. Matt was not a Christian and had zero desire to know more. He saw firsthand how the church treated me and my family after some rubbish happened that was out of our control. Matt was not a fan. I kept a journal during that time in my life, because if I didn't, I'm sure I would have done something terrible to myself. My journal was plain, nothing on it to draw attention because I never wanted my family to think it was a journal. It was supposed to look like a school notebook. One day during lunch, I was at my usual table where Griffin sat. I realized I needed something from the choir room, so I left my stuff at the lunch table, not thinking anything about leaving my backpack there. I had no idea anyone would go through my stuff because that had never happened before, and I didn't have anything of value in there anyway. Well, as it turns out, my journal ends up being valuable because I'd written about Matt and I. Griffin thought he had the ammunition to get me back into church, and I'm assuming Matt was supposed to join us. Griffin proceeded to take my journal and tell basically everyone in our social group, which led to most of the school knowing. A private moment became everyone's, and it was freaking humiliating. Thankfully, Matt didn't blame me, even though I felt like it was all my fault. He was more confident than I was, but also didn't get nearly the same shame thrown his way that I was getting. I knew I was leaving in a few months, so I tried to keep my head down and focus on school, but being called a multitude of slurs by people I grew up with, it grates on you after a while. I guess Griffin's plan was to shame me back to church, but instead all I wanted before leaving town was to ruin Griffin. It took some time, but I got there. Matt, our other friend Henry, and I were hanging out at my house after school. My house backed up to a street that often had roadkill due to being right alongside a huge swathe of woods. At this point, I knew that my revenge was going to include Griffin's brand new truck. This truck was literally all he could talk about because it was custom. His parents got it for him as an early graduation present. It was super expensive. It was perfect. The bottom line is he loved that truck more than anything he'd ever had. I'm not a car person, so I have no idea what the truck was or if it was good, but I do know it was really, really tall, like you couldn't see the top of it, which ended up being bad for Griffin, but fantastic for revenge. There was a big, super dead possum on the road behind my house that had been there for what seemed like a week, but I don't remember how many days exactly. Normally the town was good about sending the guy down our road to pick up roadkill, so it had been there long enough for me to notice it, which didn't happen often. I was staring at the possum because, well, it was there. I'm staring, Matt starts staring, then Henry starts staring. We start talking about Griffin while we're all staring at this disgusting pile. We're talking and I'm getting mad, madder than livid. However, I calm down when I realize we have an amazing opportunity in front of us. Gentlemen, we're going to bag that super dead possum and put it in Griffin's truck. This wouldn't be quite that simple, so we start brainstorming how we can fully get away with this. Griffin lived in the area of town where it was faster for him to walk to school instead of drive. Shortcut through the woods to school meant a 3-minute walk. Driving to school meant that he had to go 20 miles an hour or slower, and one of the cops was always out because of how the schools were placed, so no speeding. It still took barely any time, but it was a longer route than the shortcuts. Griffin, of course, drove to school. We had a plan. I snuck out that night, met Matt and Henry wearing all black and a mask, bagged up the super dead possum, the most disgusting thing I've ever done, and drove to Griffin's. We parked a bit away and went through the woods to the back of Griffin's house, lugging this bag of putrid nonsense. This was before the time where a lot of people had cameras on their property, so we didn't have to worry about anything besides floodlights on the side of the house. We decided to put the possum on top of the truck, knowing that Griffin wouldn't be able to see it, couldn't drive like a butthole, and wouldn't be taking his truck anywhere besides school. So, that possum was freaking bloated. And if any of you are at all familiar with bloated roadkill, you may know where this is going. The possum was heavy and not going anywhere until this revenge was done. The next day at school, Griffin parks in the student lot like normal. We go to class like normal. I get called a few names throughout the day, and everyone is normal. I went through that day gleefully, awaiting the final bell, knowing Griffin was in for a nasty surprise. This is happening 2 weeks before graduation in a very southern state. It was hot as anything where I grew up, with 90% humidity on top of it. So, the bloated, super dead possum on top of Griffin's car, that possum did what an old, bloated possum is gonna do, which is explode. If you've never experienced this smell, I hope you never do. The final bell rang. Matt, Henry and I strategically placed ourselves a bit behind Griffin so we could see him once he got to his truck. When you made it to the parking lot, you made it to the smell. It was so horrible. People were gagging, frantically looking around, trying to find the source while covering their noses and sprinting to their cars. I knew this plan was going to satisfy my revenge, but I never imagined this level of chaos. Griffin gets to his car, and because the possum exploded, he definitely notices it now. Also, he had his windows cracked open, and all the juice seeped into the roof, down the windows, and the inside siding of the doors. There was no way he was driving home, so he had to call a tow. Griffin started vomiting because he'd stood too close to his truck for too long. Matt, Henry and I were in the music programs and often stayed late, so we stuck around for this whole fiasco. Nobody noticing us, and we get to see everything. Griffin manages to get on the phone, calling his parents, crying that his truck had been destroyed, and we could hear his dad yelling from the speaker. Eventually, the tow arrives, the guy gagging, but he gets the truck loaded up and out of the parking lot. At this point, Griffin had been yelling, crying, and vomiting about his truck long enough that the people left at school knew what had happened, and by the following morning, everyone knew. When Griffin came into school the next day, his parents and a guy in a suit were with him. A lot of people knew Matt and I had issues with Griffin. Matt was called to the principal's office, but never me. I never know the exact reason for this, but it's most likely a combination of not having any physical evidence against Matt and myself, and that no one imagined a woman would be involved in a retaliation scheme so disgusting. Griffin, his parents, and guy in suit tried to throw weight around to get some type of punishment for what happened, but there wasn't really anything the school could do to appease them without knowing who did it or having evidence that it happened at school. There were cameras at school, but it was clear that Griffin arrived at the school with the super dead possum already on his car. Everyone totally knew that Griffin's car was destroyed by Matt, and probably me, but never Henry. There's no reason to suspect Henry, but with no proof, no one could actually say anything. After that day, people stopped calling me names, and I was mostly ignored until I moved away. If people did have to talk to me, they were polite and to the point. I was told years later that people were genuinely terrified of Matt and I because plenty of trash had been said, so everyone thought they were going to be next. The super dead possum was very effective. Pretty sure Griffin's truck ended up entirely unusable, but I don't know what they did with it. I only know that they spent a lot of time and a decent amount of money trying to get the smell out with no luck. Wouldn't be surprised if every car detailing service within 100 miles was used. Griffin didn't speak to Matt or me for the remainder of my time in that town. He stopped sitting with us, stopped going to events that we were at, and never invited us to church again. I was only around through the middle of summer, but it was long enough to witness a noticeable difference in Griffin's behavior. The graduation ceremony arrived, and being a year younger, I was in the crowd cheering for my friends. This was completely unplanned, but I get giddy picturing his face decades later. I managed to make eye contact with Griffin after he was done walking across the stage and quickly made an explosion motion with my hands and winked. He knew exactly what I meant. The only true drop the mic and I'm out I've ever had. And there we go. I think that has to be one of the most original Nuclear Revenge stories I've ever read. Imagine Griffin's reaction coming out of school and being like, okay, first of all, what is that truly repugnant smell? Second of all, why is it getting stronger as I'm going towards my car? And third of all, oh my God, I'm now vomiting. I would have loved to see it. Now, look, you could argue that maybe it's not nuclear. I mean, we've seen definitely more serious revenge tales than this one, but you have to remember that these guys are in school. There's a limit to what you can do here. And getting a dead animal from the road and completely writing off someone's car with it, that's pretty nuclear to me at that age. Also, you got to think about the amount of money lost during this. I mean, the car alone is very expensive. And I imagine they also tried to spend a lot of money, as OP said, through all these dealerships trying to fix the issue, but to no avail, it seems. That's a lot of cash. Now, before we get into our next story, I have a very special announcement for you. After an insane amount of demand from you guys, I'm delighted to say that I've released some limited edition Not Today Karen merch. Picture this, you're out and about in the streets and a wild Karen appears and starts confronting you. What do? Well, normally you have to talk to a witch like this. However, get one of these t-shirts or hoodies on and all you have to do is simply point to it, laugh, and walk away. How easy is that? The link is down in the description if you like what you see. Go ahead, check the stuff out. I think they'd make a great Christmas present or even just a little gift for yourself. As always, it's official stuff from the very best supplier, so the quality is unmatched and it's one of the best ways to support me and the channel. With that being said, let's carry on. How I got a car dealership to give my friend a newer car. Circa 2020 January, my friend makes a stupid decision and buys a brand new car he can't afford. His insurance is like $400 a month, he makes like $10.25 an hour working as a shift supervisor at McDonald's. His car payment is like $7.95 a month. Now at $10.25 an hour, 30 hours a week, that's a weekly income of about $300 a week or about $1,230 a month. So yeah. So my friend came to me for help because I used to sell cars and I know the industry pretty well. I go over his paperwork. The dealer did rip him off, but my friend is trying to find a way to get out of this mess, and ripping someone off isn't illegal. They did of course overcharge him for warranty, they gave him a higher APR, they had add-ons, etc, but none of that is illegal, and I know the only way I can get my friend out of this deal is if they did something illegal. So I look at his finance application that my friend signed, it correctly listed as income, which turned a light bulb on in my head. No bank is going to approve someone for a $795 car payment if they're only making $1,200 a month. It does not make mathematical sense to do that. So I start searching through his paperwork for the finance app the dealer submitted to the bank. Oftentimes, when you submit a finance application at a dealership, the dealership will take the hand-filled out application and reproduce it electronically. This is pretty normal. However, on the application the dealer submitted to the bank, the dealer said my friend was a GM for the McDonald's and made $70,000. My friend had good credit, so it doesn't appear like the bank asked for proof of income. So I go to the dealership with my friend and tell the sales manager he's going to want to put me in touch with the GM because we're going to be unwinding my friend's deal and giving his trade-in back. The sales manager thought I was joking. The GM also thought I was joking. Then I demonstrated how his dealership finance department committed bank fraud. I showed the GM the finance app my friend filled out. I then showed the GM the finance app his dealership submitted to the bank and pointed out the income difference. My friend really made $14,000 a year. The dealership claimed my friend made $70,000 a year. That's bank fraud. That's a felony. Let's keep this simple, shall we? The GM sees his dealership is in a load of trouble. The proof I'm presenting to him is rock solid. He knows it. I know it. We're all on the same page. He goes, okay, so what can I do to make this right? I go, unwind the deal, giving my friend his trade-in back. Unwinding the deal is basically the GM agreeing to cancel it and basically erasing the deal and pretending it never happened. The GM tries to avoid that, but I remain firm and remind him that we can easily take this documentation and turn his life into a living hell, and he knows I'm right. My friend also needs a car to get to work the next day. The GM says he'll check into it, and he comes back and tells me, unfortunately, they sold his trade-in already. I said, that's fine, unwind the deal, and let's put my friend into something as good or slightly better than what he traded in for. The GM goes, so he'll buy a car similar to his trade-in? I said, no, you'll give him a car similar to his trade-in. The GM goes, it doesn't work that way. I go, it does when you commit bank fraud. He's upset with me, and I remind him I'm actually being really nice and the situation can totally get really ugly. Like felony level charges ugly, like losing your franchise ugly. So yeah, this is gonna hurt, but it's gonna hurt less my way. The GM goes, all right, and he looks in his inventory and he tells me they have a 2007 Focus with 10k more miles. I tell him, no, the car you give my friend needs to be the same or better than what he traded in. The GM counters, I'm giving him a free car. And I go, no, you took his trade-in, you sold it, you made money on that sale, you also committed a felony in the process of selling him his new car, you're now correcting that mistake, this is not a free car for my friend, this is you correcting your mistake. The GM insists that's what he's willing to do. I tell him if he can't do better than that, we will go to a consumer protection attorney and have a conversation with them. Now my friend didn't want to go down this route, but that was our plan B. We get to go up and the GM says, wait, give me 1 second. I have an '08 Civic. It has 5k more miles, but it's a Civic and not a Focus. I'll unwind the deal of the new car and put your friend in the Civic at no extra cost. We agree. The GM has the paper drawn up. The old loan on the new car is cancelled. They take in the new car again, but because it's already titled, they'll have to sell it as used. That sucks for them. And they gave my friend a better car than the one he traded in. Now, for people asking why we didn't get a lawyer involved from the start, we could have done that, but courts take a long time, and this was a faster way to fix the situation. Quite a lot to unpack here in this one. First of all, I have to say off the rip, you need to educate your friend somehow on financing. Get him into some sort of finance class. Because yes, you helped him out in the end, but I mean, that decision on its own in principle was absolutely ridiculous. Paying that much for a car when you're only earning pretty much the same as that when you add the insurance together. Yeah, that's nuts. Please make sure he gets a little bit more responsible with his money, first off. Secondly, I really like your rationale for not going through the legal process because I completely agree. That might well have been way more effort, time, money, who knows, than it actually, needed to be. In the end, you got a good deal. Yeah, you probably would have made more money had you sued and gone through the legal route, but who really wants that at the end of the day? Ultimately, your mate has to go to work the next day and he has to be able to drive. Logistically and even emotionally, it just made a lot more sense to do what you did, so good thinking there. However, what I will say is that despite you doing all of this, I think I would still at least report it. You don't have to sue, but report it to the authorities because, as you say, this was illegal, this was a crime. And let's be honest, it's almost definitely not the first time this has happened. And if you don't report it, it's likely to happen again. So not just for your friend's sake and your sake, but for any other customer in the future and in the past's sake, I think you should still report this. Haribo Revenge goes way further than intended. I was a witness to this a long time ago, and the results were learned of by word of mouth. Once upon a time, there was a kid. Let's call him Marco. Marco was your everyday kid, a little skinny. I remember him being slightly geeky. If you left your pens unattended, he'd disassemble them before you turned back around in your seat at times. He was nice, polite, and fairly helpful. This was middle school. One day though, he does it to a bully. Let's call him Polo. Polo is huge, but with fat. He looks like if you drilled 3 holes into him, a giant could use him for bowling. He's not nice. He's not handsome. He's got a posse of equally disgusting friends who all gang up together to bully others. I suspect that if they hadn't ganged up with each other, they would have been bullied. Perhaps they had been in the past and got a taste of power over others when they ganged up. I don't know, I kept to myself. One day, I see Marco with a swollen eye and wet hair. He's limping a bit too, and his backpack is ripped. I asked him what the hell happened. It turns out Polo threw him into a bathroom stall by his backpack, which ripped. The toilet got him in the knee, and Polo shoved his face into the water, bashing his eye into the seats. I asked why Polo had done this to him, and he says, I took his pen apart. It was just a Bic crystal or some cheap pen like that. Things escalate over the next few weeks. Eventually, Marco has to take time off when Polo strips him naked in the bathroom, except for his boxers, and makes him shove them into the toilet. The school, being full of your typical buttholes, tries to expel Marco for damage to school property and does nothing to Polo. This is stopped by video evidence of the gang leaving the bathroom, laughing and rifling through Marco's backpack, then tossing it in the trash. When Marco comes back, he's different. He's not happy. He's quiet, subdued. He doesn't talk to anyone, and bruises magically appear on him between classes. He withdraws into himself and begins to look positively skeletal. Of course, no one at the school does anything, except this one nice jock. He comes across Polo stealing Marco's backpack and folds Polo into a trash can. Of course, he's suspended, but does it again when he comes back. The teachers give up on suspending the jock after his parents threaten to sue. The fact that someone bothered to stand up for him, though, seems to have given life back to Marco. He starts opening back up and putting weight back on, which is very good. One day, though, he's wearing a scarf. A very special, beautifully knitted scarf. His grandfather had knit it for him. Yes, grandfather, before he died. Polo steals it and comes back the next day with a bag of ashes, handing it to Marco. He laughs hysterically. Marco comes back the next day with a backpack full of sugar-free Haribo gummy bears. Polo, being the glutton that he is, steals every single bag of bears and eats them by the fistful throughout the day. Marco cries, but I remember something in his sobs that didn't quite reach his eyes. Near the end of the school day, Polo lurches out of the classroom and bolts for the bathroom. He doesn't come back the next day, or the next. Someone says they saw blood in the bathroom. Polo comes back a few days later with an eye patch and mottled, fading bruises all across his face. I believe it's called petachii. He is permanently blind in his left eye, and the bruising makes him look like a ripening fruit for as long as it lasts. He's in and out of school for doctor's appointments for a while. He didn't mess with Marco again, and instead became very introverted and quiet. The reports of blood in the toilet of the bathroom he went to were never confirmed, but it's quite likely. Wow, a very nuclear start to this episode. This bully, let's be honest, deservedly going blind in one eye. Nobody likes a bully, so is this fair? I don't know. Maybe it is. Now, OP explains later in the comments that Polo was actually extremely intolerant of sugar substitutes, so that is the reason why he had this reaction, ending up with burst blood vessels in that eye, leading him to go blind. Unbelievable. You know what? Fair play to Marco. I can't think of anything worse than getting bullied by someone like Polo. And also, fair play to the jock for stepping in, taking the suspension on the chin, but doing it for the right cause. Both of you, absolute legends. Cheating ex flaunts side chick, loses his job, and she gets graduation dress burned into oblivion. This happened almost 10 years ago. So even if dots get connected, I know I'm safe as per our laws. This didn't actually happen to me, but I executed the revenge. My last year of middle school, I introduced my best friend, whom I'm going to call Lily, to one of my arts classmates, who I'm going to call Trashy. They dated for around 7 years, all through high school and uni, until she found, right after graduation, that Trashy had been cheating on her with his classmate from uni, Catty Cat. Lily and Trashy took language lessons at a small school next to a big shopping mall, and after their breakup, I went with her there so she could cancel her classes. I've been giving her grand speeches about how life would take care of teaching the guy a lesson, all this rubbish. After being done with cancellation fees, papers and all, we went into the mall for a feel better dessert. And guess who was there at the food court? Trashy, who spotted me and Lily right away, and Catty Cat, who looked as white as a ghost. Trashy literally dragged Catty Cat towards us. We were both frozen because, can you believe it? And forced Catty Cat, who clearly wanted to be anywhere but there, to greet Lily and asked Lily, "Are you not going to talk to me?" All the while with a disgusting grin. I pulled Lily from there without a word. We left the mall, walked to the bus stop, all in silence. After I digested what had just happened, I told Lily, "You know what I said about life? Forget it. It's going to take too long." I know what I did afterwards was illegal, and only later would I realize how catastrophic it could have been. Lily still had all of Trashy's passwords, bank account, email, cell phone, etc., and he had hers. As soon as we got home, she'd been staying with me since the breakup, I made her change all her passwords and asked her for his emails. That's all I wanted. In our country, WhatsApp is the most used social media, and we often set it to backup daily into our Google Drive or Gmail. Trashy had his backup on Gmail. I skimmed through 2 years worth of conversation with Catty Cat, complete with pictures and audio files, and screenshot or cropped out the most interesting parts, such as them talking about sex in the restrooms and emergency exit at Trashy's work during his shift, bragging about how they blinded their SOs to have their escapades. It turns out Catty Cat was married. Now, I was going to send the clippings of doom to Trashy's family. He was their golden boy. But I got a better idea after learning how bad they'd fricked up. So I tracked down Trashy's boss on LinkedIn, got his work email, found Catty Cat's husband on Facebook, and using a throwaway account, sent them the bomb. I heard through the grapevine that Trashy got fired, but cried, literally, for a second chance, and was on probation at work. One more F up and bye-bye. Not the outcome that I wanted, but meh. Fast forward a few months, I was talking to my cousin and she was telling me about how her fiance's colleague was traveling all over the world, and he recently posted some pictures at a bar made of ice, and she wanted to travel there too. She showed me the picture the guy had posted. Lo and behold, traveling colleague was Catty Cat's ex-husband, Rick. I asked her how she knew Rick, and she told me he was her fiance's friend and work colleague. I didn't tell her about my shenanigans, only said that Rick's ex-wife and my best friend's ex had cheated on her, and inconspicuously, I hope, asked my cousin how Rick was, how it must have been a sad breakup for him, and did she spill the tea? So, Catty Cat had introduced Rick to Trashy during her graduation ceremony a few weeks before I sent the bomb, saying, "Look, this is the friend who helped me with my graduation project." Rick had allowed Trashy and Catty Cat to use his computer at home for said project. It turns out they were screwing on his bed while he was working his butt off to pay for her sorry one, and she made him shake hands with her lover. Rick was a programmer, Catty Cat was from the countryside, and she'd been living in the city with him for a few years. Rick had an awesome salary. He paid for everything so Catty Cat could focus on uni. But one day, he received some evidence that his wife was cheating on him. with the guy he'd shaken hands, the same guy he allowed to use his computer in his house to help his wife do her graduation project. Rick got her graduation dress, set it on fire, shoved her into the car, drove all the way to her family's home in the countryside, and reportedly dragged her into her parents' house by the hair, made her kneel and tell her mother and father what she'd been doing. Her father was so distressed he had a minor stroke, and her mother kicked her out and cut her off from the family. As far as I know, last I checked was 5 years ago, there was still no contact. Rick threw her out of the house. She moved in with Trash's family, and Rick, now with his salary trashy ex free, was living la vida loca, going to ice bars in neighboring countries. And I was desperate. Had Rick been 1% madder, he could have burned her along with the dress. Her father could have died after my interference. I didn't calculate how Rick could react at all. I called Lily, told her all about it, lost my sleep over it for weeks, and even considered confessing to what I did. Lily asked me to let it go. What was done, to take this as a lesson and let life run its course the next time, as I'd initially said it would. I'm not proud of it, and even though I don't lose sleep over it anymore, I still feel somewhat guilty. Confessing here is kind of cathartic though. Okay, it's one thing cheating on your partner. I mean, that's pretty bad. I think we can all agree. But then, to do that, and then introduce your partner to the person that you're cheating on them with, and have them shake hands is actually crazy. Like, the level of psycho that you must have to be to do that is actually nuts. And the fact they both did it as well, they genuinely said, no, I want you to meet the person that I'm cheating on you with. It's unbelievable. It really is. That might be the most shocking thing in this entire story to me. I mean, I don't even care that someone almost died, had a stroke. The fact that someone would do that, wow. And also, OP, it's not your fault that it could have gone a lot worse. Like, them cheating was the reason why this happened. Them cheating is the reason why the dad had a mini stroke. It's not you telling them. It's not you making Rick know that it happened. Like, yeah, you did the right thing by letting everyone know and telling Rick what was going on. The fact that her dad had that reaction is because of his daughter's actions. It's nothing to do with you. And also, I know you say at the end, or at least Lily has said, next time just let nature take its course. I don't know. I feel like cheaters need to be called out, right? What might have happened if you hadn't called him out? Yes, the dad nearly died. But again, we've said that's not your fault. So Rick had to know, didn't he? I think you did the right thing there, personally. Let me know what you think down below in the comments. Now, before we get into our next story, I have a very special announcement for you. After an insane amount of demand from you guys, I'm delighted to say that I've released some limited edition Not Today Karen merch. Picture this, you're out and about in the streets and a wild Karen appears and starts confronting you. What do? Well, normally you have to talk to a witch like this. However, get one of these t-shirts or hoodies on, and all you have to do is simply point to it, laugh, and walk away. How easy is that? The link is down in the description if you like what you see. Go ahead, check the stuff out. I think they'd make a great Christmas present or even just a little gift for yourself. As always, it's official stuff from the very best supplier, so the quality is unmatched, and it's one of the best ways to support me and the channel. With that being said, let's carry on. Never safe to badger. As an apprentice, during the early days of my career, I worked for a no-nonsense Italian master marble installers. During one of the first big projects I was on, they were installing 8 by 20 centimeter Italian bone stone on the side of a brand Perfect. All the huge pallets were stacked in one area, and after finally clearing customs from Italy, sitting on the dock for 110 days, 3 of us were charged with keeping the installers in materials. Holy heck, they were installing like madmen and we were busting balls. Whenever a guy had to wait more than a minute or two, he would start yelling in Italian, Andiamo, stupido cretino. Let's go, stupid moron. Nice. Side note, my father was off the boat from Campobasso, Italy, so I knew what was up. At the same time, the so-called bank safe guys were also on site. Seemed there was a stupid visor, an older gentleman and his nitwits, Bluto-like son. He reminded me of non-General Zod's slow lackey. After 3 weeks of listening to the dad berate and badger his son, we'd all just about had enough of his trash. This was evident during one lunchtime when a tree frog jumped out of one marble crate. The idiot dad grabs a gallon of muriatic acid sitting there, pours some into a plastic cup, and proceeds to drop the frog into it, bellowing an evil laugh. Oh look, an Italiano frog. Here's what we do to them here in America. As luck would have it, the frog merely jumped the F out of that cup and right onto the guy. Holy heck, he starts screaming as the acid is all over him. He runs out to the hose and starts drenching himself. While he's out there, all the other guys agree that he's just a POS, and the son was the prez of that club. Okay, another week goes by and all the trades were behind schedule. Our marble crew was on our final leg, and the very last pallet was behind this god-awful huge deposit safe, still packed on a pallet. I couldn't even get around to it to offload it by hand. I politely asked the kid if he could move it, and he snaps, "Better ask my dad." Ugh, so I go and find him, again, politely inquire, and he snaps, "I'll move it when I'm good and ready. You think you're more important than us? Can't you see we're busy? Who the frick do you think you people are?" You people? Marble setters? Italians? Guys in Harley shirts? I don't know. So I go and tell the installers who are already getting agitated, and oh boy, the one guy starts yelling at the son in Italian, and the father is yelling back at the guy. I may not understand you, but I know you're calling him bad names. How about this? F you, huh? Understand that? Huh? F you and your trashy marble. So then the stupid visor's number is on the wall, and we call, and he calls, and finally the son begrudgingly and ever so slowly moves the frickin' pallet. The entire rest of that day, the two of them were hollering disparaging remarks about us. We wanted to strangle the both of them, as you can imagine. At the very end of the job on a Friday afternoon, us apprentices were breaking down the wet saw and cleaning up all our debris. While tossing garbage, I overhear the dad hollering at the son. Okay, I'm leaving, so don't screw this up. When the cement truck gets here, don't let him pour until you check the electric meter in front of the driver. Be sure he sees the reading, okay? Got it? He must see the reading, okay? I'm asking one thing. Don't screw this up. And off he goes. No idea I heard this entire exchange. Now, what he's talking about is this. When they install these huge stainless steel deposit safes into the wall of a new bank, they wrap the entire thing in about 200 feet of cable wire. So if anyone tries to chip their way in, it will trigger the alarm. Damn thing resembles a rubber band ball when it's finished. Before they encase the entire kit and caboodle with high-strength #1 concrete, the safe guys clip test wires to each end to be sure there is contact for the alarm guys, as there will be zero way to repair it after the pour. Everyone is gone but the son and myself. The truck pulls up. The kid, all boss-like, approaches the driver, and over the roar of the truck, he hollers, "You have to witness the meter read." The guy's unimpressed. Yeah, whatever. The dimwit attaches the leads and it shows positive conductivity, and he shows the driver. When he looks at it, I really don't think he knew what he was even looking at, and snorts, "Okay, I guess." The kid's all proud and screams, "Let it go!" And while the guy's positioning the shoe over the framed-in deposit safe, I go around back and take my trusty Gerber plier multi-tool and just reach in there and start cutting wires. I cut a half dozen and floofed up the wires to cover it. Less than 3 minutes later, the entire thing was covered and encased in the concrete. The next day we show up, and there's the father, the son, the stupid visor, the concrete guy, the contractor, the alarm guy, and 4 suits standing around this meter, taking turns assigning blame. The best part we heard was the father screaming about getting paid, and the contractor refusing until that circuit showed positive. And we all know that's not going to happen. Now, normally I'm not a vindictive kind of guy, but this incident was different. I felt I was representing all the guys on site that were badgered by these idiots. Not sure of the final ending, but that bank opened on time, and the exterior marble looks magnificent. I smile each and every time I drive by it. And there we go. I'm not entirely sure, to be honest, who exactly had to pay for all of this. I assume it was the father and son though, as they were contracted to do the work and they didn't fulfill their contract. So I assume they never got paid. Maybe the bank had to pay eventually anyway, but as long as the father and son didn't get any money, then I'm satisfied, that's for sure. Or maybe they never actually realized and they just were like, oh, screw it, let's do it. So that means that if you ever come across this ATM, I don't know where it would be, but hey, maybe you can work it out somehow. You can just get into it and take all the money without causing the alarm to go off. Yeah, it seems unlikely, but you never know. Cheat on me with my best friend? I'll wreck your career and publicly humiliate both of you. Shahid and Sarah have been like family to my wife and I for several years, practically ever since we moved in across the street from them. The 4 of us were extremely tight. Our kids are the same age as theirs and are all good friends. We were one big family unit. We did dinner together a few times a week. We went on vacations together. I truly saw Shahid as a brother, and my wife and Sarah were very close too. 5 months ago, I was completely blindsided by the discovery of an affair between my wife and Shahid. My wife had left her email open on our computer, and I saw an email from her to her longtime therapist saying that Shahid would be joining her at an upcoming session again. What the frick? My mind started racing. Why in the world would Shahid be going to her therapy sessions without my knowledge? I did a search and found some other emails to and from the therapist proving that Shahid had been going to sessions together with her for about 6 weeks. I checked our mobile phone account and discovered that since late summer, they'd been exchanging hundreds of texts every day, peaking at nearly 500 per day by the holidays. Speaking of the holidays, my wife and I hosted both of our families, parents, siblings, etc., for both Thanksgiving and Christmas dinner, and Shahid and Sarah joined us either for dinner or after dinner on both holidays. Text records show that the entire time that they were at our house celebrating with our families, my wife and Shahid were texting each other across the room. They were doing that pretty much every time the 4 of us hung out, for months. And, you know, all day, every day, just in general. But what bothers me the most is that they were doing it with Sarah and I right there. I confronted my wife with the evidence, and she admitted that yes, she and Shahid had fallen in love. It just happened. I don't know how, but I love him, and I just don't feel anything for you anymore. I'm sorry. They'd gone on a school district trip together. Something had happened in her hotel room, and things had moved quickly from there. She explained as I lay face down on the couch, unable to look at her, that they'd already made plans to move out and divorce me and Sarah, and while they didn't plan to move in together immediately because of the kids, they'd probably do so eventually. The meetings with the therapist were supposedly mostly for the purpose of finding a way to break this to me and Sarah as gently as possible because they were so very concerned for our well-being. Sarah and I are fairly certain that they weren't planning on telling us about the affair at all and were simply going to discover their feelings for one another several months down the line after they come up with some other reason to divorce the two of us. Yeah, I have to agree here, that seems way more likely. I can't believe what she's saying. Oh, we were so concerned for your guys' health and well-being that we weren't going to tell you about the brutal affair we were having in front of your eyes. My wife moved out 2 months ago. I was and still am utterly destroyed. I cry every day. I cried right in the first few paragraphs of this story just now. I worry non-stop about the impact on our kids, but I'm also not exactly a shrinking violet when I feel that I've been wronged. And in this case, I was, objectively, very, very wronged. So a couple of years ago, Shahid ran for a Board of Education seat as a pretty extreme underdog. I helped him with his campaign materials and debate prep, and my wife, a well-known school district employee, this becomes important later, got the word out as best she could. Much to our surprise, he actually won in a squeaker by just a few dozen votes. Being on the board became the center of Shahid's world. He joined every committee that he could. This turned into the foundation of his affair with my wife, as they were constantly going to school events and meetings together on evenings and weekends. Once I discovered the affair, my thoughts turned pretty quickly to revenge, and it occurred to me that an extramarital affair between a member of the Board of Education and an employee of the school district was at least bad politics, and it possibly violated district policy. Making things far worse for them was that my wife was in the running for an open administrative position, and everyone knew that she was more or less guaranteed the job and the major pay raise that came with it. She just finished her master's degree in school administration at the urging of her principal and the superintendent so that she could be promoted to this specific position. I had plenty of evidence of the affair. Text from both of them admitting to it, text records showing that they were texting hundreds of times a day, emails to and from the therapist, etc. I considered simply emailing all of the evidence to the board and the superintendent, but felt like I, as the grieving, betrayed spouse, might not be seen as a credible source. So instead, I invented a fictitious, furious friend who was planning on showing up to the next board meeting and publicly shaming the two of them for their affair. I told my wife that I'd tried to talk this person down, but couldn't guarantee that they wouldn't show up and humiliate them publicly. As I expected, this led Shahid to conclude that the only option was for him to preemptively admit the affair to the board. The superintendent subsequently recommended that Shahid resign, which he did. Sarah said that he was utterly humiliated and crushed and barely got out of bed for a few days afterwards. Once word of the affair and Shahid's resignation started getting around, the superintendent, a longtime friend of both my wife and Shahid, contacted my wife and tearfully informed her that it was no longer politically appropriate for her to be promoted to an administrative position within the district. The position that had been lined up for her was later filled by an outside candidate. This sent waves of confusion and rumor throughout the district, as it was pretty well known that my wife was getting the job. The day after she was informed that she wasn't getting the promotion, my wife and I, despite our crumbling marriage, took our son out to breakfast together on his birthday, and a parent stopped by our table to congratulate her on her new role. She said thanks, then excused herself to go cry in the bathroom for a while. I let the dust settle for a couple of weeks, and then right before my wife moved out, let them in on my little secret. There was never a furious friend threatening to expose them in the first place. Just me. Word of all of this had gone around our fairly small town, which Shahid grew up in and my wife has worked in for nearly 20 years. My wife refuses to talk to me about how things are at work now, but I've heard from some people I know in the district that her formerly spotless reputation has taken a major hit. Shahid, formerly a gregarious social presence in our neighborhood and at events and pubs in town, has completely gone underground and barely emerges to mow his lawn. He's moving out soon to a trashy little townhouse, which is all he can afford due to all the child support he's going to have to pay his wife. My wife and Shahid claim that they plan on trying to make things work together, despite all the public humiliation. I wish them lots of luck with that. I'm sure it'll be a lot of fun to show their faces together in town. And there we go, that is the conclusion of the post. But before we get into some analysis and commentary, OP has actually answered a couple of questions. First of all, are you and Sarah a thing now? You should totally be a thing, that would be awesome. No, We're friends. We've been incredibly important to each other since this all started and have certainly gotten a lot closer, but not in the way everyone's thinking. This would all be so much harder to deal with if I didn't have her to lean on, and she says she feels the same way about me. We're going through basically the exact same situation with the same players, after all. Shathid hasn't moved out yet. Once he does, we plan to go back to getting the kids together more often like they used to. It'll never be the same, of course. She already does come over with the kids from time to time, but it's just tough with Shathid's constant presence across the street. Next question. Didn't your revenge hurt both sets of kids? Well, not really. Shathid has a day job. The Board of Education was his hobby and his passion, but this didn't affect his income at all. And my wife has been assured that if she wants to pursue an administrative position with another district, she'll have glowing letters of recommendation from her superintendent and principal. It'll mean giving up a lot of work relationships in the process, but given the hit her reputation has taken, I'm guessing she makes that jump sooner rather than later. In the meantime, not moving to an administrative job means that she still has summers off with the kids. Third question. Why do you call her your wife instead of your former wife? Well, we're working our way through divorce mediation, but it isn't final yet. Will be soon. And then the final question. Why didn't you notice all of the texting your wife was doing? Well, I did. It was really starting to annoy me. It was excessive. She has a big social circle and does tend to text a lot anyway, but it was really getting over the top. At one point in November, I asked her to agree to a no phones at the dinner table rule, which she agreed to reluctantly, but would then pout through dinner, and eventually she just started using her phone during dinner again. All that said, I was blind. Not only was the texting getting weird, but her relationship with Shathid was starting to make me uncomfortable. Sarah noticed it too and agreed. We actually confronted them a couple of times about it directly, and they both swore up and down that it was just school stuff they were talking about, nothing else was going on, and for whatever reason, we believed them. Probably because the mind tends to refuse to see things that it doesn't want to see. Now, incredibly, the post I've just read there was posted over 4 years ago on Reddit, on r/ProRevenge. However, just a few days ago, OP posted an update. That's right, an update on a ProRevenge story that's over 4 years old. I don't think I've ever seen anything like it before, but stay tuned, because that is coming up. Now, as for this initial story on its own, my thoughts are this. First of all, how exceptionally sad. These two are just disgusting. I mean, look, cheating is one thing, right? And we can all agree that's a pretty bad thing to do. But cheating in front of your partners together in the same room, like messaging and texting when your wife and your husband, respectively, are there, is actually nuts. How can you with any sort of conscience do that? I have no idea. Like, I'm not gonna lie, I struggle to understand how people cheat in the first place, unless they're in a really dark place mentally, to be honest with you, or they just feel like they have no other option. I mean, genuinely, I've never done it, and I don't see myself ever doing it. Maybe that's a naive thing to say. I don't know. But this is one step further. Doing it knowing that your partner is in the same room as you. It's unbelievable. And then, as I mentioned during that story, because I just simply had to mention it at that point, the fact that you've said, oh no, we were trying to work out how to tell you, but we knew it would really hurt you, so we just didn't tell you. Like, is that not the most dumb logic you've ever heard in your life? For me, it's gotta be. As for your revenge OP, I've got to say, genius. Making them self-destruct themselves is great, because it just means that you didn't have to do anything. Like, they did it for you. Lovely stuff. Anyway, with that all being said, let's get on to this update 4 years later, just literally a few days ago at the time of recording. Now, before we get into our next story, I have a very special announcement for you. After an insane amount of demand from you guys, I'm delighted to say that I've released some limited edition Not Today Karen merch. Picture this, you're out and about in the streets and a wild Karen appears and starts confronting you. What do? Well, normally you have to talk to a witch like this. However, get one of these t-shirts or hoodies on and all you have to do is simply point to it, laugh, and walk away. How easy is that? The link is down in the description if you like what you see. Go ahead, check the stuff out. I think they'd make a great Christmas present or even just a little gift for yourself. As always, it's official stuff from the very best supplier, so the quality is unmatched and it's one of the best ways to support me and the channel. With that being said, let's carry on. So, where to start? It's been a bizarre few years, especially with COVID thrown in the mix, which I somehow still have never caught, despite my kids getting it twice each. Thankfully, just mild cases. Well, at the time that I posted the original story, I was obviously a wreck. Things actually got significantly darker for a while after that. My ex decided to start bringing Shathid around our kids just a few months after she moved out, which was really hard for me to deal with. I'd never really dealt with serious depression before, but things got bad enough that my doctor more or less forced me to start on an antidepressant because I admitted to him that I was thinking about suicide pretty frequently. I think this is where I should mention trigger warning for the rest of this paragraph. I actually had a very specific plan and everything I needed to do it. The one thing that gave me any kind of relief was telling myself that if life got any more unbearable, I had a way out. So yeah, it got bad, but I'm still here, and thankfully I don't think about that option anymore. I reluctantly decided to dip my toe into the online dating world, and after a number of short-term things that didn't pan out, I actually connected with someone. We'll have been together for 2 years next month. She is absolutely amazing. We don't live together, and for the time being, we're both good with seeing each other a few times a week. Would I love to see her more? Yep. Am I ready to live with someone again and go all Brady Bunch with our respective kids? I'm not sure. For the time being, we have a lot of fun together, and that's more than good enough for me. As far as things stand with my ex and Shahid, they're still together. But there seems to be trouble in paradise, because my kids report that they almost never see him anymore. My kids don't like him at all, and they just avoid him when he's around, according to my older one. When all of this started, she'd seemed confident that they'd be living together pretty soon, but they still don't. And as far as I know, there are no plans in the works for it. They did buy a boat together, which I find hilarious for some reason. It just seems like the classic affair couple thing to do. Sarah took a long time to accept that her marriage was truly over. But once she did, she really did an admirable job of moving on. She engrossed herself in home improvement projects. She remains the same incredible mum that she's always been, and she's been in a FWB type relationship, which is all she wants right now, with a nice funny guy for almost 2 years. We hang out here and there, especially when my pool is open in the summer. We aren't nearly as dependent on each other as we were in the beginning, but we're still close friends. And no, still nothing more than that, which I'm glad about, because the one thing this situation definitely never needed was more drama. My ex left the school district she was working for and took a job in a neighbouring district. I've no idea what Shahid is up to, nor do I care. I hardly ever see him except at the occasional school event. For a while there, I was worried that he'd look at me the wrong way, and I'd wind up in jail for knocking him out in an elementary school cafeteria or something. But I just don't care enough about him anymore for that to be a concern. So all in all, life is pretty okay right now. I do miss being a family. I still have nightmares about all of this stuff and deal with intrusive thoughts at times. I fall asleep to audiobooks now to keep those thoughts at bay. Otherwise, I still struggle to sleep sometimes. But my girlfriend is amazing. I have an incredibly supportive family. I just officiated my sister's wedding a couple of months ago. And I have a big dog who needs lots of walks, and that's a huge help for me on so many levels. And if you're lucky enough to be watching on YouTube, here is your dog tax. Look at that cute little dog. I mean, to be fair, it's actually quite a sizable dog. Very cute nonetheless. And if you're not on YouTube and you want to come and see the dog, link is down in the description. So there we go. I tell you what, I really enjoyed that update because it's very rare that we get an update like that, especially so long after the actual event takes place. And I love the honesty of it as well, because you see some of these stories and then people are like, oh yeah, now I feel great again. But let's be honest, like going through that sort of an event that would change your life so much for the worst, at first anyway, is going to have such a lasting impact. I love the honesty of OP saying it actually got worse before it got better and they went to a really, really dark place. And even now, 4 years later, they still have to listen to audiobooks to help them sleep at night because, you know, it makes sense. You wouldn't expect someone to be like, oh yeah, now I'm amazing, best I've ever felt. Ideally, they'd be in that spot, but it just seems a bit unlikely to me that someone would be like, oh, I'm so much better now, just a few months, years, whatever afterwards. Yeah, love the honesty. I mean, look, I'm not saying eventually that OP won't get to that spot, and I really hope he does, and Sarah does as well, and it seems like you've moved on to a significant level, but yeah, you'd still be deeply hurt by this, I'm sure, for a good amount of time afterwards, and it's nice to see someone actually admit that. Don't mess with Southerners. Okay, so before I start, I want to first say, I cannot attest to the validity of this story. It isn't mine, but a story a friend's great-grandfather told them when they were younger, and from what I've heard, the man wasn't all there towards the end. So, back when my friend's great-grandfather was in his early 20s, he'd been very close with this one family. They were described to me as a family of swamp people, but Floridian. There was the grandfather, father, mother, uncle, 2 daughters, and 3 brothers that lived in this little trailer park in the woods. They kept to themselves and didn't bother anyone. My friend's great-grandfather only knew them because he'd met the youngest daughter while in school and they were dating. He got a job from the grandfather and was kind of absorbed into the family. He worked in their bait shop with the uncle and life went on. Well, one day the eldest daughter went to a party some local boys were throwing and dragged her sister along. My friend's great-grandfather and his uncle were at the bait shop. Mother and father were at home. No one knew where the 3 brothers were, and the grandfather was on the couch napping his 6th beer away. During the party, the 2 sisters split apart, and the younger one ended up getting pulled away by 2 guys. They did you-know-what, and then ran when the older sister found them. News got back to the family quick, and as my friend put it, the brother miraculously materialized and the old man rose. For the next week, the men of the family searched for those boys and found them. They weren't locals and were visiting family, but the men broke into their home, beat them up, tied them up, and took them deep into the glades. In the glades, my friend's great-grandfather's grandfather handed him a revolver and said, "She's your woman." So he took the gun. He thought about just shooting them dead then and there, but instead shot them each in one leg and told them, "If you find your way back, I guess I'll forgive you." Then they left. Those guys were never heard from again. They never came out of the glades, and their truck was later sold to a neighbor by family members. My friend told me he asked why his great-grandfather didn't just shoot them, and he said, "I wanted to see if God would forgive them, because I wouldn't." Personally, I interpreted that to mean God showed them mercy by letting them die in the swamp instead of by the hands of my friend's great-grandfather. Until my friend told me that story, I didn't think Florida had mafia-type stuff like that. Now guys, of course, this happened a long time ago and is hearsay, so we can't validate exactly what happened in this story for obvious reasons. However, let me remind you that this takes place in Florida. That's right, the same state in which a man was arrested for allegedly tossing an alligator into a Wendy's drive-thru window. So as you can see, realistically, this story is extremely plausible. As for the revenge itself, yeah, definitely nuclear, but deserved. I mean, it did end in deaths, but they did some horrible, heinous things. Guys, get in the comments. Was that too far, or was it exactly right? Let me know. Try to harass my grandma, you might take back a nub. This story takes place in the early 60s in a medium-sized Midwestern city in a local neighborhood bar. The title of this story comes from my grandma's old saying. See, my grandma always carries a switchblade in her purse for protection, and she said if anyone ever tried to attack her, they might get her, but she's gonna take a piece of them. Hence her term, "I'll take back a nub." First of all, some context about my grandma before we get into story time. My grandma was born in the Deep South back in the 30s. She was one of 4 sisters, who I'll refer to for the rest of this as the 4 sisters. My family decided to migrate up to a northern Midwest city in the 50s. Just for clarification, my family is African American, so if you know anything about the United States history, you would understand why they would want to escape the Deep South during this time period. My grandma was 20-something when she moved north with her husband, my grandfather. The rest of her family, her sisters, mother and uncle, also moved up north. Because of housing discrimination, my grandparents were forced to live in the black neighborhood. The rest of the family also lived in this neighborhood and were basically within walking distance of each other. The thing to know about the 4 sisters is that they were all Spitfires. They are some of the most caring women you can know and were all excellent mothers and grandmothers, but they were not to be trifled or messed with. If you cross one of them, that might be your butt. This was especially true of my grandmother, who was all of 5'1" and fairly petite. The 4 sisters were quite the characters, and it didn't take the neighborhood long to know of these 4 sisters because of their crazy antics. They also loved hanging together on the weekends, either at one of their houses or sometimes at the local watering hole. On this particular night, my grandma wanted to go out for a few hours with her sisters. Only one could go, Aunt C. My uncle, my grandma's oldest son, was in charge of watching his siblings for a few hours on this lovely Saturday night as my grandma dressed to the nines and headed down about half a mile to the local bar to meet up with her sister. This was a pretty small bar that got a lot of regulars. My grandma had been there dozens of times and has plenty of stories to tell about her time there with her sisters and also with my grandfather. My grandma and Aunt C are lounging in the bar, having a couple of drinks and cracking some jokes with some of the regulars when a new character is introduced to the scene. This guy's name is Leroy. He was a regular as well. To picture this guy, I want you to think about a guy as skinny as Jimmy Walker and about the height of Kevin Hart. Combine this and make him about the age of 40 and you'll have Leroy. Now guys, I'm sure you all know who Kevin Hart is and how small he is, but this is Jimmy Walker, as you can see, a very skinny man. Leroy was a regular at the bar too, but then again, Leroy was a regular at almost every bar in town. You see kids, before the internet, online dating apps and hookup sites, the way most people met was at bars. Our good friend Leroy was notorious for wanting to have one-night rendezvous with the ladies at the bar. Well, everyone knew his game, and after he'd had a few one-night stands with some of the ladies in the neighborhood, most now avoided him like the plague. This of course didn't stop him from going to bars on a weekend, trying his best to shoot his shot and hoping a lovely filly might come home with him for the night. Leroy had flirted with my grandma and aunt on previous occasions, and even though he was told that they were both happily married, he kept trying to have a conversation with them. As soon as he entered, he once again strolled over there, trying to see if he could get some action with either of them. My grandma quickly told him not to waste his breath, but he sat down anyway. What surprised my grandma was that behind Leroy was another dude. He was well over 6 foot tall and handsome. My grandma honestly couldn't recall this guy's name, so we'll call him Jerk. My grandma knew right away that this Billy D. Williams wannabe was gonna try and sweet talk and charm his way into some ladies' pants that night. It seems that he had his sights set on his first target, which would be, of course, my grandmother and my Aunt C. It seems like our good friend Leroy was gonna try and be this jerk's wingman. He started off with some small talk to my grandma, couldn't tell her how gorgeous she was and something about how, getting lost with heater eyes and all that other nonsense. My grandma said that he had diarrhea of the mouth and pretty much let what he said go in one ear and find the nearest exits. My grandma quickly shut this clown down and let him know she wasn't interested. So then instead, he set his sights on my aunt. Now, even though my aunt can take care of herself, my grandma was always a little protective of her. This jerk made a comment about how nice my aunt's thighs were as he looked lustfully at her. My grandma quickly told this fool that my aunt was married and not interested in his nonsense. This is where the story changes and revenge comes into place. She's not interested and she's happily married, said my grandma. She can speak for herself, replied the jerk. He then said to Aunt C, "Your legs must be tired because you've been running through my mind all night." Yes, this fool used the pickup line. "Are you hard of hearing or something? Or a little slow? I told you she's married and not interested." "You talk too much. Maybe I'll put what's in my pants down your throats." Now he actually said his D, but not sure if I can use that word. Ladies and gentlemen, this is where everything got real. Yes, everybody else in the bar knew you wouldn't and shouldn't talk to my grandma that way. She did not play for that nonsense. This is one of those times where you could actually hear a pin drop as everyone got quiet. My grandma exploded with an expected, "What the frick did you just say?" My grandma was seething with anger, but the joke played it off as if it was a good idea. My Aunt C knew what was about to go down. She grabbed my grandma and started leading her to the door. You see, my sister knew what many other people knew, and that my grandma kept a .38 snub-nosed revolver in her purse and typically a very sharp switchblade wrapped up in her bra. My aunt tried to leave my grandma out the bar to avoid any more confrontation, but my grandma wasn't having it. As she was being pushed out of the door by my aunt and another male customer, my grandma seized a nearby beer glass and flung it towards the jerk. Fortunately, glass didn't hit him and it erupted close to his feet, but it certainly got his attention. This well over 6 foot, well over 200-pound man jumped out of his chair and stormed towards my grandma, saying that he will kick her butt. My grandma replies, "Bring it on." She eventually gets fully outside and he decides to go outside too. He's a little apprehensive because a couple of the neighborhood bar dudes have gotten up to see this and he's afraid they might get involved, since it's unacceptable for a man to hit a woman and all that jazz. The guys said they're not going to do anything and just want to watch. My grandma quickly pulled out the switchblade that she had in her bra, unwrapped it from the paper and looked him in the eyes and said, "Come on, motherfucker." You would think at this point that any civilized person might be apologizing further for the crude language he used earlier, or you would think that the guy, seeing that my grandma had heels on, might just walk away, knowing she's probably not going to chase after them. Do you think this clown chose either option? If you said he chose neither, you'd be correct. Let's give you a prize. With a woman with a switchblade bearing down on him, he decides to stand his ground and doubles down by again calling my grandmother a female dog and telling her he is going to beat her butt. He next starts putting his fist up ready and it's about to go down. No worries. No one says my grandma has to fight fair. You see, what this clown forgot about was my aunt. While the jerk had his fists up ready to start striking like he's Mike Tyson, my aunt has conveniently taken off one of her high heel shoes. She uses the heel to bash him right in the shoulder blades. Of course, this staggers our young jerk. As he turns looking at my aunt, screaming obscenities, it gave my grandma time to come and slice this fool right in the side. As our young jerk howls in pain, my grandma says to him, "Maybe I should slice something else off." The jerk staggered sideways, looking at these two infuriated women, one with her high heel still in her hand, and the other with a switchblade with the sight of his blood on it. Don't worry, he wasn't hurt too badly, as she sliced him but didn't stab him. By this time, a few other people are stepping in and are trying to calm the situation down, and the jerk left the scene. The aftermath. My grandmother heard from others that the jerk went to the hospital and got treatment for getting sliced on the side. This was the 60s, so no cops were called, and if they had been called, they probably would have been really slow getting to the scene. I've got no idea what he told the hospital staff and doctors, but regardless, I heard he got patched up and was no worse for wear. Rumor has it that he ended up moving to Chicago a few months later. He never tried to get revenge on my grandma for this, so there's that. My grandma says she wasn't going to tell my grandfather about what happened. He was an over-the-road trucker and was out of town when this event happened. But you know how things quickly go through the grapevine. He of course scolded her for this, but she just gave him a wicked smile and said that the guy deserved it, and that he came at her, so it was self-defense anyway. I'm not sure that's exactly entirely true, but that's what she was sticking with. My grandma continued going to that bar every once in a while, and was a bit of a legend. Our friend Leroy ended up being the epitome of a deadbeat dad. Rumour has it that he has something like 10 kids with 8 or 9 different women. My grandma still has the switchblade, and yeah, she showed it to me. It's somewhere in her massive collection of items now, otherwise I'd attach a picture of it. I also learned that my grandma is a woman of her word, because she actually took back a nub in the form of an ounce of flesh from this butthole. Hopefully you enjoyed this story about my grandma. She's told me the story a few times and was a little fuzzy on a couple of details, as she is in her 90s now, but I'll do my best to answer any questions. And there we go, that is the end of that story. Let me know in the comments, do you think that this revenge was justified or not? Now look, sexual harassment is objectively bad, but was this revenge a little bit too far? Did she have to actually slice this guy? I don't know. Maybe she did in order for him to learn his lesson, and clearly it wasn't that bad of an injury, but wow, getting a knife out, that's top level. I mean, the main takeaway for me from the story is how stupid this guy is. I forget the harassment part, that's bad enough, and that's dumb. Clearly, you gotta be a moron to even think about doing something like that. But then seeing someone with a knife and continuing to try and fight them, where is your logic there? It doesn't matter who has got a knife in front of me. If someone has a knife out, I'm not going to go towards them. So dumb, and to be honest, he probably deserved it. Bait and switch, spoiled by their own policy. About a year ago, I signed on with a company offering a fairly generous salary and good benefits for what seemed to be a less demanding workload compared to my position at the time. I go through the onboarding, so far so good. The whole unlimited PTO, Kool-Aid and whatnot. The week I'm set to assume my duties, leadership announces, rather than salaried employees, across the board we would be 1099 without benefits, with no guarantee of adequate workload. All other policies, aside from the pay structure and insurance, remained intact. They very much hammered this one home as some sort of consolation prize. Through public Slack channels, my new middle manager blisteringly rallied against the decision, very much backing their reports with ferocity I've never seen in a manager. I was appreciative. I'd left a salary position for this one to gain some stability, and now my income was zero, and there was no telling when I could earn given I had no accounts yet. I had 2 kids, and due to the cost of daycare, my wife is a stay-at-home mum. This would financially harm us horribly. Interspersed with my fear and anxiety were the constant reminders of the company's generous benefits offerings, which gave me an idea. That same infuriated middle manager was who approved my hours, expenses, and my PTO requests. Seeing an opportunity, I submitted 3 weeks of PTO. Within a few minutes, it was approved and signed off on. Now, due to those policies remaining intact, I was entitled to 40 hours worth of pay for the next 3 weeks, despite doing zero work, having no accounts yet, and having no intention of returning, thanks to their complete disregard for everyone below management. Those 3 weeks came and went. The policy was honoured, and I was paid my full salaried amount as it would have been before the restructuring. On my day back, I was assigned 1 account and given 6 hours of unpaid meetings a week that were mandatory. I then submitted 2 more weeks of vacation and got it approved. I thankfully got callbacks from places I turned down for this position and accepted a previous offer plus 20% and signing bonus. I made tens of thousands I never earned simply because they took away my chance to honestly earn it and tried to leave me with my butt in the wind. I'm still with that company that I subsequently joined, and I've never been happier financially, professionally, and spiritually. Now, the thing that springs out to me about this story is that this doesn't sound entirely legal. Not what you did, I'm saying what they did, the company. Surely you can't offer somebody a full-time contract at a certain salary and then say, oh no, actually, you're not getting this. Like, that can't legally be allowed. They could fire you, but they'd have to pay you notice and they'd have to give you notice. I just don't see how this can be a thing, right? Am I wrong here? I feel like there's more to this story. If you were to go to the IRS, I feel like this could turn into even more nuclear than it was. Because ultimately, right now, you only just got a bit of money out of them. You could have got them entirely shut down. Maybe that's something you want to do in the future. I don't know. It feels like there's more to this than I'm seeing. Big respect to the middle manager, by the way. He is one person that you'd love to work for, just standing up, not just for themselves, but also for their employees. Good to see. The company, though, Very dodgy. I really want to know more. My £8.50 revenge on my cheating, thieving ex. When I was at uni, I started dating this guy. At first, he was wonderful, dedicated to his studies, fun to be around, attentive, and always surprised me with things, working hard at his job, etc. Then, bit by bit, things unraveled. He started skipping classes. Then he barely bothered to go at all. Worse still, he never helped around the house. Never washed up, cleaned up, did laundry, anything. He was even fired from his job for too many no-shows. All he wanted to do was sit at home and play Xbox or browse the message boards and forums. This was in the days before social media, when dinosaurs roamed the earth. This left me having to pick up extra shifts, sometimes double and triple shifts, all while going to class and studying. I later learned that this was a pattern for him. He'd be really dedicated to whatever he set his heart on, but then get bored and fall back into old bad habits. Then he'd find a new passion and rinse and repeat. I knew I should have ended the relationship much sooner, but I held out hope that he would snap out of it, that maybe it was just exam stress getting to him. I desperately wanted things to go back to how they were, but it was not meant to be. I caught him cheating and threw him out. I was so stressed with everything that it wasn't until the next day that our joint savings account crossed my mind. There was a little over £5,000 in there, and bar a few hundred from him, the rest was money I had saved. I checked the account and it was all gone. My ex had cleaned out the account and moved into a new flat with his side chick. I called the bank. There was nothing they could do. He was authorized on the accounts. I contacted the police and they told me there was nothing they could do either since it was a joint account, so nothing criminal had happened. They suggested taking it to civil court, but said I'd probably spend more money than I got back in legal fees, so it likely wasn't worth it. My ex had stolen £5,000 and there was nothing I could do about it. I felt like such an idiot. I got even angrier when I saw his posts on various forums boasting about his new game consoles, new games, new TVs, and gadgets, all bought with my money. I'm not usually a vengeful person. Petty on occasion, sure, but I've never wanted to exact revenge as much as I did right then, and I knew just how to do it. While I was a student, I temped every summer to help pay for my studies. One such job had been for a debt collection agency. The work was as trashy as you can imagine, but it paid really well and it was only for a few months. My ex had been dodging debt for many years and was very proud of that fact. He was also proud of the fact that his debt was close to being statute barred and he hadn't paid a penny. For those of you that don't know, in the UK, creditors have about 6 years to collect a debt, and then it becomes statute barred. That means the money is still owed, but creditors have no legal way to enforce payments, such as using bailiffs. My ex was a few months away from reaching statute barred status. However, what a lot of people don't know is that making a payment on that debt resets the clock. If you pay any amount, then that 6 years starts from scratch. Previously, I'd used my insider knowledge to help him dodge the debts. Now I would use it to hit him where it hurts. By the end of our relationship, I was handling everything, including his debts. I had the paperwork, so I knew who he owed and how much. I called his creditors up. I was honest and said I was a friend calling to make a payment on his behalf. I didn't pretend to be him because that would be a big legal no-no. They weren't allowed to disclose any details, but they were able to take payments. I paid the minimum I could on each debt, about £1 on most, but one had a minimum payment of £1.50. It was the best £8.50 I've ever spent. I also made sure to give them his new address and contact details, as well as his parents' address. Having worked in the biz, I knew they wouldn't change the address since I wasn't the account holder, but they would note it. They had various systems where they could search for his name against that address and see if anything came up. If they got a hit, then they'd change the address. The trap was set, and all I had to do was wait. A few months rolled by, and then it happened. His posts on the forums went from boasting about his new gaming PC to panicking about a court date. He called me and begged for advice, and I told him to F off. Seeing I wouldn't help, he asked for advice in the forums. One of his online friends told him not to turn up to court. That way, they wouldn't be able to prosecute without him there. It was terrible advice that was 100% untrue. In fact, not showing up is one of the worst things you can do, especially in civil courts. This was getting better and better. The court date came and went. My ex naturally didn't go. A few weeks later, my ex posted photos of his empty flat. Bailiffs had cleaned him out and taken every last one of his shiny new gadgets and toys. On top of that, he ended up with several CCJs, county court judgments. Now these are a big deal and can seriously damage your credit history, making it hard to get bank accounts outside of basic ones, near impossible to get credit, including a mortgage, and it can also make it hard to rent a place, since many landlords don't like renting to people with CCJs as they're considered high risk. He also wouldn't be able to find jobs in the financial sector. Now that he was broke and didn't have nice things, his side chick left him. Now look, I never got my £5,000 back, but it felt good to see everything he bought with his ill-gotten gains taken away. I hope that $5,000 was worth it. Also, for anyone wondering how a student accrued 6 years of debts, he started at the university I attended when he was 25. He'd initially gone to a different uni at 18, but dropped out a year later and went into the world of work. Then he convinced his parents to fund a business degree. He wanted to become an entrepreneur. And for anyone worried about the age gap, I deferred my uni start date by a few years so I could travel. I was 22 when we started dating and he was 26. Yeah, just good knowledge and genius is all you can say there really. I for one wouldn't have known anything about that, the 6-year rule, and I live in the UK. It's just good to be some justice being done because £5,000, if you didn't know, it's quite a lot of money. What I would love to know though is how much his debts were, because I don't think that was explicitly mentioned in the story. If his flat has been fully cleaned out, not just of the stuff that he bought using the money he stole from you, but of more things, then who knows? The level of this debt could be mental. It's good to see. An £8.50 payment for thousands of pounds worth of justice? Oh, sensational. Be abusive to employees. Say bye-bye to your job. My former boss was, simply put, an absolute frickin' butthole. He was the type of person that had the ability to be so condescending while acting as if he was doing you a favor. His condescending attitude was sometimes downright abusive, and he seemed to have a particular problem with all of the female employees. He acted as if they were dumb and needed assistance with every step. He loves to scream at people, regardless of how little their mistake was, if there even was one. He was a slave driver and expected everyone to sacrifice their own personal lives for the job. The thing that sparked this revenge was him telling me to miss my older sister's birthday to come into her work on a day that I'd already booked off. Nobody liked him. Me and all of my colleagues in the department, around 10 or so, couldn't stand him being here anymore. So we did the protocol. All of us piled together the evidence we had of him not sticking to booked off holiday schedules, having inappropriate and sometimes abusive language, and we brought it all into one Google Doc. This was step 1. Step 2 was getting a cherry on top. We did this by getting him to do one of his screaming tantrums at one of us. We wanted this to be as damning as possible, and the youngest and smallest girl out of all of us volunteered to be the bait. She made an intentional beginner's mistake in her paperwork, something bound to get her roared at, and the idiot took the bait. You see, he likes to do his scoldings in front of all of us to prove a point, or rule by fear as he called it. This of course gave us the perfect opportunity to film it from behind our desks and add it to the Google Doc. Now you see, in our company, there's this really not well-made email system. You can send an email to an entire department, and I mean entire, as long as you have its name and manager's name. But the thing about this was the fact that all of this information was completely and freely given to employees. This means that a person could send whatever email they want to the entire company, including the CEO. So, one morning at 10 AM, to ensure that as many people would be working as possible, we made a burner email and sent that Google Doc through an email to everyone in the company. It took a little while as there were many departments to get through, but we got there in the end. We gave the email the subject, boss's name, vital information, branch name, department name. Of course, our boss received the email as well, and you could basically hear the clutter from his office, as people all over the company were contacting him to ask him what the heck this was about. HR did a light investigation into him and took heavy disciplinary action. As far as I know, he wasn't directly fired, but instead he resigned. And a month after that, we never saw him again, and he was replaced by a new guy who was also a butthole, but just less of one. His expressions during the whole ordeal helped me sleep at night. Yeah, I think what probably happened here is he was asked to resign pretty forcefully, and therefore the company didn't have to pay severance as they would have done if he was fired. But after this debacle and that video, you want to get out of this company as quickly as possible. How embarrassing to have everybody in the company, I don't know how many employees there are, but come on, probably hundreds, maybe even thousands, see a video of you shouting at a young woman. I mean, look, I know there are worse videos out there, but that one is pretty bad. Oh, I've just seen a comment down below from OP. They forgot to mention one of those colleagues recently found his Facebook and found out that he's getting a divorce. We have no idea why, but people are speculating that it relates to this incident. Well, things go from bad to worse for this horrible boss. Can't say he doesn't deserve it, because he does. Look, if you're an idiot, you're a butthole like this, you deserve everything bad that comes to you. Sorry. Hoisted by his own petard. I have a friend called Kerry who just broke a story to me. Not sure if it's petty or pro-revenge, or even malicious compliance, but here it is. Alright, quick cast run through. The names have been changed to protect identities. Kerry is my friend and the heroine of this story. Sharon is a secretary with loose morals. Roger is the IT manager and villain of the story. Ivan is the CEO and company owner, also the owner of 3 or so other small companies, one of which was in the same office block. And Olivia is Roger's wife. So, Kerry works for a small IT company as a programmer and web designer, along with about 8 others, including her manager and her newest colleague, Sharon the secretary. Roger is a womanizing rogue who makes frequently moderately offensive comments about women, customers, and staff, like he has no brain-mouth filter. Sharon is, as Kerry puts it, an upwardly mobile skank who will literally, yes, actually, blow the boss if he buys her new shoes, so boner for a bonus. And she's had a bonus, not just for productivity. Wow. The first Kerry knew about Sharon's behaviour was late one Saturday afternoon when everyone had left for the weekend, except Kerry, as she had a project. She was beavering away at her desk in a nearly silent office when she heard a squeal. She immediately got up to investigate and found her boss's door ajar. She heard another squeal and walked in, finding Sharon bent over the desk with her skirt hitched up above her hips, her boss trousers around his ankles, enjoying himself. Yes, this is artistic license, but that's how she described it. Roger's expression indicated fury and embarrassment, and he sounded to be enjoying it. Sharon had an expression like the cat that had the cream, with no pun intended. Oh my god. She certainly didn't seem bothered about being caught. Roger recovers his composure, puts his trousers back on, and called Kerry back into the room. She hadn't stopped to watch, and threatened to fire her if she let slip what she'd seen. The instruction was, tell nobody. Act like it never happened. It's important at this point to mention that this was at the height of COVID, and they were looking at the possibility of reducing staff numbers, something which fortunately never happened, but at the time of the story, nobody was sure. Question for you, is your boss Matt Hancock? Kerry kept quiet. Ooh, that's nice alliteration. Can I just say, I didn't say that, that was written in the post, but I do agree. Roger would occasionally remember that she knew what he was up to and would give her dirty looks, but little more was said. Sharon and Roger were still having regular sex at work, and Sharon was getting the bonuses that the team should have received. She was also receiving bonus, but nobody would have felt jealous had they known. One Saturday, about 6 months after the initial shock discovery, an opportunity for revenge, and technically malicious compliance, presented itself. Olivia, Roger's wife, popped in. The staff was still there, and the office was busy and a bit noisy. Roger had excused himself to his office with Sharon early, as he knew his wife would be in later to meet him and wanted to get his end away before she arrived. She was early. Olivia was standing at Sharon's desk. Sharon was the secretary after all, and Kerry saw an opportunity. She offered to help in the absence of the secretary, and Olivia asked to see Roger. Kerry obliged. The next bit is a little bit vague as Kerry skips some details, but apparently she knows how to get past the lock on his office door, like the door frame is a little too big, and that's the vague bits. Kerry was able to open the door as if it wasn't locked and hold it open for Olivia, who walked in to see her husband screwing the secretary from behind. Olivia's eruption was one of incandescent fury, which caused Roger's excuses to melt away. He was trying to explain that it wasn't what it looked like while pulling his trousers up. Sharon, meanwhile, had tried to discreetly leave, but Olivia had turned her full wrath at Sharon's direction. So Sharon excused herself by asking Roger why he'd never told her he was married. Now, he had actually told her, but the ruse worked. Roger stared daggers at Kerry, but she told him that she'd done as he asked. She'd never told anyone and had acted as if it never happened, just as he'd demanded. Olivia asked what she meant by this, and she explained in painful detail what had been going on. With Olivia screaming blue murder at Roger, nobody heard the big boss, Ivan, arrive. He must have heard the ruckus and come to investigate. At this point, he'd heard enough from outside the office, and Kerry was asked to leave. Now, Roger doesn't work there anymore, and neither does Sharon. Sharon was dismissed for gross misconduct, and Roger is awaiting a court date. Something about fraud or embezzlement or something. Details are sketchy here. No information about the future of his marriage, sorry. Kerry is still at the company, but now works as an assistant manager to a newly appointed female manager. I guess this is petty revenge, pro-revenge, and malicious compliance all rolled into one. You did nothing wrong. You did exactly as you asked, as you said. Kerry, that is. But yeah, you knew what you were doing, and I like it. It's great to hear as well that Kerry wasn't actually punished for this, because you never know what could have happened. Ivan could have just said, you know what, sack all these guys off. Let's get in completely new employees. But she actually got a promotion with a new female boss to work alongside. That is great to hear. He forced me out of the closet. Let me spill your own terrible, awful into the world. I'll be honest, this story is not mine, but about my two cousins, Alex and Steve. My mother is originally from a small town in the coastal region of my country. She left when she married my dad, but her two sisters stayed in the town. Alex is one of the sons of my youngest aunts, and Steve is the son of my oldest. When they grew up, both moved to a big city in the region for college, but took way different paths. Alex went into an art-focused career, and after 2 semesters, came out as gay, while Steve went STEM and bathed himself in the machismo, homophobic culture of the region. You can guess they were not exactly close, and as far as gossip goes, they pretty much hated each other. As far as Alex's sexuality went, it was a well-known secret among the cousins and his brothers, teens and young adults, people with social media basically. But it was never acknowledged in front of my grandma, the other adults, or even his own parents. That was the context. Now let's get to the drama that unleashed on December 2017 at our family's Christmas party. That, as always, took place in my grandma's old townhouse. By midnight, Steve was drunk and looking for a fight, and he thought that Alex would be the perfect prey. While not the exact words, you could say this was the statement he shouted in the middle of the dance floor. Hey, Alex, where's your girlfriend? I don't see her around. Oh, yeah, you don't have one. Why is that? Hey, auntie, you know why your son didn't bring a girlfriend? Haven't you heard? Oh, that's because he is a sissy F-slur. He screws guys, or actually, he lets guys screw him like the little female dog he is. Alex was speechless, and so was the rest of the family, including my grandma. The musicians even stopped the music playing, but before someone could even say something back to Alex, he threw the bomb. Trigger warning. Yeah, well, at least I screw with humans. But let's not forget that your first girlfriend was the neighbor's donkey. You even tried to force me to F her once, didn't you? And hell broke loose. You see, in this particular area of my country, there is the extended myth that some men, especially teenagers, commit bestiality with donkeys. And in rural areas, this is not entirely untrue. But it's obviously never spoken that openly or casually, especially when there are outsiders present. Outsiders like Steve's girlfriend from college, who he had invited. The poor girl literally threw up in the middle of the party while she started soothing herself and crying like there was no tomorrow. To make an already long story a little shorter, my parents, thankfully my dad doesn't drink and could drive, offered to take her back to the city. We left the party in the middle of shouting, punches, someone fainting at some point, and whatnot. But I wouldn't have posted this here if this is how it ended. Steve's now ex-girlfriend told what had happened to her city friends, her parents, and basically anyone who would like to hear it. Steve was already known as a donkey effer all around the campus before he'd even come back from vacation, and his social life crumbled to dust. There was also a lot of cyberbullying involved, and he ended up quitting university. He went back to the old town and is currently the owner of a bar. He also married a local woman, if anyone wonders what happened to his love life. On the other hand, Alex ended school and he stayed in the city as a designer. His homosexuality was basically overlooked by everyone, for obvious reasons, and he is in fact my very Catholic grandma's favourite grandson. The funniest part of it all? With time, this has been basically thrown under the rug in my family. We still hold Christmas parties at the old townhouse. Alex and Steve keep their distances, but can actually speak to each other without murder intent, and we all agree to forget what happened in December 2017. Now guys, clearly I have no way of knowing whether or not these rumors are actually true or not, but the most telling thing about this, I can't believe this story exists by the way, I just gotta say this, is that Steve never explicitly denounced these rumors. Like, he could have just said instantly, "What are you talking about? You're clearly lying." But no, he just took it. He didn't even have an explanation. That is very telling. Like, look at this comment right here. I'll bring it up on screen. So wait, did your cousin actually screw a donkey, or was everyone just willing to accept that it was something he would do? OP replies, I think he was quite shocked and drunk in the moment and forgot he could, you know, lie. Instead, he started saying things like, I can explain to his girlfriend. So yeah, he basically admitted to doing it. Well, there you go. That is, I guess, the proof. Oh, what have I just read? Alright, next story. Now, I kind of hope this one is a little less illegal than the first. but in many ways I don't actually. That was incredible. Scum of a man hires my unit to do a job after he refused to pay us, so I help to ruin him. A few things. First of all, I am a security officer with a private investigator certification, which allows me to take PI, private investigator cases, as long as it doesn't interfere with local police investigations, and any crimes that I witness must be reported to the police ASAP so they can make an arrest. PI cases come from a few sources. We're sometimes contracted by local police to do what's referred to as spotter work, where we are brought on active wide area investigations to do recon work and look but not interact with anything that might be involved with the case. Basically, we're just an extra pair of eyes. Or the local police will mix us in a surveillance operation, and we would follow low-profile individuals and report their day-to-day activities. These are completely confidential. Then there are client contracts. This is where corporate clients contract our company's personal investigations unit to investigate their employees' day-to-day activities while on the job, to see if there is some hint that an employee is committing a crime, and to report if there is a reasonable proof that an employee is breaking the law on company time. The job is to gather evidence to prove guilt or innocence. These aren't confidential, but we usually sign an NDA. And finally, there are personal contracts. When a person wants to hire a personal investigator to do a job, it's usually something along the lines of a husband or a wife suspects the spouse is cheating on them and wants some kind of proof. Or someone is looking for a relative or lost family and is trying to reconnect with them. There is no disclosure agreement, and it's up to the client to draw up a disclosure agreement. Now, most don't, but we keep quiet as professional courtesy. Okay, now that the job description is done, let me tell you what happened. About 3 years ago, I'd been hired to do a personal contract. The client, a rich, sleazy snob, was apparently stupidly rich. He hired my unit. When I say my unit, I mean the unit I work with, a 5-man team. He believed his wife was cheating on him with other people, and he wanted proof of this so he could start his divorce process with solid evidence. He contracted us in a 6-month contract and was to pay the company XXX dollars upon completion. So we set up surveillance cameras all over his large house and in the woman's car with the client's permission. We had at least one of the team tailing her at all times. Good times. Day in and out, we watch their lives. And in this line of work, you either get detached or emotionally invested, like watching a soap opera. As we watched them, we quickly realized that this lady was a frickin' saint. She volunteered at a soup kitchen and a children's hospital. She helped with local churches' canned food drives. Those sort of things. She was the perfect definition of what a good human should be. But on the other hand, the husband was a total idiot. He was the one we caught many times bringing women to his house, sometimes 2 or 3 girls in a day, and that was only what was recorded in the house. So we arrive at the 4-month mark, which is basically where we show all the evidence so far and give the 3-quarter reports. We show him everything that we found and have a 6-hour debrief with video and audio support, showing that she hasn't done anything wrong other than a speeding ticket and a few double park situations. After we concluded the debrief, he looked stupefied. He says, "So you didn't catch her cheating? That was the point of me hiring you?" My boss, our captain, turns to him with a serious stare, perhaps the most serious and badass looking face I've ever seen from that man, and said, "You hired us to investigate your wife. You're unhappy that your wife is an honest and faithful woman?" The snob is visibly annoyed. He stands up and is getting his jacket when my captain says, "Look, there are still 2 months on this contract. We're going to keep tailing her and we'll meet again after our contract is up and give you any updates." The snob turns to him and says, "Don't bother. This is over. I'm ending it. Come when she's not home and get your equipment out." So, a week later, we did exactly that. Now, fruit for thought. When contracts like his are made, a small portion is paid up front as a commission fee, and the rest is paid at the end of the contract's allotted time. In his case, 6 months. Now, pay works like this. The commission is divided up between each PI as a bonus to our salary, and the salary is what we get from the company to get us through to the completion of the contract. The remaining balance after being paid by the client is then divided into a cut for completion for the PIs and a cut for the office. Good money when done right. So fast forward to the next payday after the contract is officially over. My unit gets a call from our office to come in on the next payday as there is an emergency meeting regarding us and the last contract. We get there and we find out the snob pulled the funding and refused to pay us for the work. So we are getting paid, but just not with the completion bonus. We all left super angry. We went to lunch and brainstormed how to get even with this guy. Then we remembered all the house footage of his dirty deeds. At first we wanted to blackmail him, but that's low and we're better than that. I remembered the wife, so I reached out to her. I set a date to sit down and explain everything. I showed her the videos. She cried for a good half hour. I think, honestly, I broke her whole world. It was gut-wrenching. I then advised her to get a lawyer and proceeded to give her all the collected evidence and my business card. The aftermath. Fast forward about 6 months. I'm called into court as my company is suing the guy for fraud, breach of contract, and unpaid dues. My company wins the case easily, as his lawyer's argument was that we failed to deliver the result he wanted. But we weren't hired to deliver a product, we were hired to observe and report. We got paid in the end. I was contacted by the wife, who thanked me for all the evidence. She got a divorce. Because of all the evidence I gave her, she got almost everything from him. His huge house, both cars, and a huge cash sum. Moral of the story, don't try to screw over people who specialize in gathering evidence and reconnaissance. I mean, fair enough, good moral and all, but you would have thought that a normal, logical person, not even, just someone that's not completely stupid, would have thought that before going into this entire debacle. No, like, you know that cameras are being set up in your own house, yet you're still bringing women back and being unfaithful to your wife, the one person that you're trying to catch out for, I don't know, an unknown reason, probably so that you can then, in your own head, enable yourself to keep cheating on her, knowing that she's doing the same. I don't know. Very logical, very interesting story. Good stuff from the PIs, but yeah, what a stupid man for so many reasons. Next up, tell others I hit my dog, see what's coming for you. Me and my husband, I'm 28, he is 29, are in a chicken breeding club, which provides an allotment garden-like structure. We joined a year ago and got to know Klaus, an old man who actually lives in one of those said gardens. At first, he was very kind and helped out 1 or 2 times. But after a while, he got very greedy, telling us to help him in his garden, selling stuff for him on eBay, or just care for his chickens. Some people did say that we should keep our distance from him, but we didn't listen. He regularly invited us to drink a beer with him, acted like he knew all of town, is well known and has many connections, but the real thing was, yes, he was known, but for all the bad reasons. We talked to him a lot in the first few months, and we noticed he's highly addicted to alcohol and tries to make a dime out of everyone and everything. You know the saying, blood is thicker than water? Not for him. At first, he helped us out, for example, giving us some tools for free, or giving us money for working over at his place. Also, we kind of felt bad for him, living your last days in a garden shed, but after a while, he gave us next to nothing for our work. No money, broken tools, so garbage we had to dispose of. Not even a thank you. He also started to talk to us in a very demanding tone, old male Karen-like. Instead of messing with him, we started to simply distance ourselves from him, not doing any more of his work. His last effort to win us back was to buy 20 weed plants and put them in his garden and show us he knew we smoked. But as soon as he demanded that we sell his future 5 kilos, we backed off again. As others noticed that we'd stopped hanging out with him as much, they started to tell us how Klaus truly is. He started to live there as soon as another club member, since dead, lost his home and lived on his farm over there. As for the rules of the club, that's not allowed. But if he was allowed to, then Klaus had to be too. Klaus lived there for 14 years, not because he was homeless or another stroke of bad luck in life, but because he wanted to live as inexpensively as possible. We learned he had loads of debt. No wonder, considering how much he drank. We found out that this is the case since he's been old enough to drink. He's tried to rip everyone off of their money since forever. His brother, his best friend, even his wife. Some say if she was still alive, he would sell his own mother. As the weeks went by, we learned more and more about him, that he'd done this with nearly everyone who joined the club, not just with us. We saw it too, as a new member, who's also mentally disabled, cut his hedge for him for 16 hours and got $20. And no thank you. Klaus started to dislike the way we stayed out of his way. So his response to that was to talk terribly about us, even threatening to tell others that we smoke, which is illegal over here. I mean, real, full-fledged lies. For example, we would owe him $200, we'd do parties till late at night at the farm, we would hit our dogs. At that last point, we snapped. So we bought a drone, got videos of his weed plants, and got the police involved. Get them before they get you. Klaus peacefully sat in the club's community house, drinking beer, at 9 o'clock in the morning, as 10 police officers walked in directly into his garden. Little Klaus turned his head around like an owl and immediately stood up and walked outside. He asked one cop, "Hey, can I help you?" And they asked for his name. "Oh, Mr. Klaus, we were actually looking for you." Behind the officer talking to him, the other cops raided his farm, not only finding the plants, but discovering themselves that he does live there. They see a living room with an obviously used bed, food leftovers, a TV, etc. They asked him where he has his address. He told them the address of his long deceased brother. They sent a car to that address, but found no clue he could be living there. By the way, he also got money from the state, social benefits, also meant to cover his rents. Now the rent on this farm is $30 per year, so huge no-no. Money fraud is one of the worst things you could do over here. The cops stayed at his farm for the next 4 hours collecting evidence. The whole farm surroundings were patrolled by some cops, so word spread like a wildfire. Every single farm owner got over there to see what was happening, cheering that this douche finally got what was coming for him after ripping off so many people. It was amazing. This dude had 14 years to make this farm his little hidey hole, making money out of it. He split the whole community, giving us a bad name overall, and not even bred chickens. He just had them to sell the eggs. Oh my god. To his luck, he was clever enough to tell the cops it was only CBD. This is still illegal, but not as bad. So they had to send it in to test it, buying him some time. The club held a meeting. That was a trash show. As soon as this topic started, he said that we planted the weed there. He only gave us the little plots. Most laughed, some said nothing. We voted for his eviction. Had to, as are the rules. He got 15 against him, and just 3 voted for him to stay. So, our revenge is not over yet. I'll keep you updated. Now, at the time of recording, OP says that Klaus has just 4 weeks left before his court date, so I assume that if an update is going to come, it will be at the result of that. I can't think what might happen to him. Hopefully he does get enough time, because surely they're going to test and they're going to know that the weed wasn't just CBD. They're going to know it's just, full on marijuana. And surely he's going to be sent down for a long time. You would hope so. You would think so anyway. But I don't know. Maybe he's done something silly or clever in the meantime. Who really knows? Just thinking about it, it does actually come across as quite sad. Like Klaus, at the end of his life, spent 14 years living in a shed. No one wants that. You could just feel bad for him if you heard about that without any other context. But the fact that he's doing all this other stuff, ripping people off, just being horrible in general, and then also just being a criminal, yeah, he deserves whatever's coming for him. But I didn't retire. My friend, I'll call her Sandy, worked at a travel agency in British Columbia, Canada. It was a small owner-operated business with the owner and 3 employees, including my friend. Everyone worked Monday to Friday from 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. One of my friend's co-workers, I'll call her Jane, an older woman in her early to mid-60s, was a long-time nuisance employee. Among other sketchy behavior, Jane was always scamming ways to take time off over and above her official paid vacation time. In order to make up for the lost hours, she would claim overtime hours and pay by supposedly going into the office in her off hours to finish up work without being requested to do so by the owner. Despite being caught in her own lies on a number of occasions and being warned about trying to claim for unsanctioned overtime, the owner of the travel agency was reluctant to officially reprimand Jane or get rid of her. The reason being is the owner discovered after she'd hired Jane that Jane had actually been fired from her previous job at another local travel agency for pulling the same stunts. However, Jane had sued her former employer for unfair dismissal and had won a settlement. After a few years of my friend Sandy working at the travel agency, the owner was ready to retire and offered to sell the business to my friend. Sandy took her up on the deal and took over the business while keeping on Jane and the other employee. Once again, just as the previous owner was afraid to get rid of Jane, so was Sandy for fear of being sued. When Sandy took over the business, she instituted guidelines regarding taking time off, and she established an official no overtime policy. Jane would still try with her shenanigans, but was far less successful in getting what she wanted with my friend in charge. However, Jane still had one trick up her sleeve when she wanted to take time off on a whim. Sandy was a divorced single mum of 2 boys who were heavily involved in youth hockey. She would sometimes leave the office an hour or 2 before closing to get her boys to hockey practice or a game. In order to avoid requesting in person and potentially being denied, Jane would wait for Sandy to be out of the office to book a day off if she didn't feel like coming into work or had made plans. Sandy would then arrive at work the next morning only to discover that Jane wasn't coming in. Despite this happening a number of times, Sandy would usually let it slide since there was now a definite no overtime policy. Therefore, Jane could no longer claim to come into work on the weekend or after hours in order to try and make up for the day off. She'd either miss out on a day's pay, in turn saving Sandy money as the owner, or it would come out of her remaining paid vacation days. Moreover, 2 people in the office at one time could usually handle everything. Jane not coming in was really a no-loss situation for Sandy. There was one time, however, when Sandy was going to be away for 1 or 2 work days just before the weekend to take her boys to a hockey tournament. She told both Jane and the other employee, both verbally and in writing, that they could not book time off for the dates in question since she would be away and needed both of them in the office. Within a few days of giving this notice, Sandy went into the office on a Saturday to do some paperwork and go through the sales for the week. This is when she discovered that only the day before, Jane had booked a trip for her daughter and son-in-law to Las Vegas, as well as a plane ticket in her name to Calgary, where her daughter lived. Both the trip to Vegas and the ticket to Calgary coincided with the date Sandy would be out of the office. Sandy then checked the vacation booking schedule to further discover that Jane had indeed booked the days off that she'd expressly been told she couldn't have. Not mentioning she'd discovered the travel Jane had booked for herself and her daughter, Sandy emailed Jane, telling her she would have to deny her the days off since she'd already been told they were unavailable, because she, Sandy, would be away and needed Jane in the office. Through a continued series of email exchanges, Jane replied and outright lied to Sandy with some excuse about her daughter getting some long-awaited medical treatment or surgery, and she needed to go to Calgary to help out for a few days and look after her granddaughter. Sandy replied to this lie by telling Jane she knew about the trip she'd booked to Vegas for her daughter and son-in-law, that Jane's trip to Calgary was most likely to babysit her granddaughter while her daughter was in Vegas, and that she would still have to deny Jane the days off, especially since she booked them after being told they were unavailable. Jane countered in her subsequent reply, without even addressing the fact that she'd been caught in a lie, that she had been a dedicated employee of the travel agency for several years and couldn't understand why she was being treated so unfairly after all she'd done for the business. She then wrote that since she wasn't being treated as a valued employee, she had no choice but to retire and was giving her 2 weeks' notice. Despite Jane's threats, Sandy replied that she would still be unable to grant her the days off and left it at that, without making any mention of Jane's threat to quit or retire. Sandy then contacted her accountant, who also acted as her de facto business advisor, and explained what had happened with Jane. Also aware of Jane's previous shenanigans, Sandy's accountant told her that this was the out she'd been looking for with Jane, and she had it all in writing. He told her that Jane had essentially resigned and retired, and all Sandy needed to do was honor Jane's desire to do so. Let her finish out her 2 weeks, or pay her 2 weeks' wages in lieu with no further severance pay legally required since she hadn't been fired. The following Monday, Sandy went into the office early, accompanied by her long-term boyfriend, to act as a witness. She put Jane's belongings from her desk into a box and took the things that were property of the business. Since Jane was old school and had resisted inputting client information in the computer database, this also included a small box filled with index cards which had client phone numbers, addresses, credit card information, and other personal information noted on them. In the meantime, the other employee had arrived for work, and they all waited for Jane to show up. Jane arrived just before 9, acting as though nothing had happened, and greeted everyone with a "good morning" as she walked through the door. However, she was apparently taken slightly aback when she noticed Sandy's boyfriend seated in the far corner of the office. At this point, Jane was midway to her desk when Sandy informed her that there was no need to go any further, and that she had accepted Jane's notification of retirement. She then handed Jane a check compensating her for the hours she'd worked in the current pay period, as well as 2 weeks' wages in lieu of Jane finishing out her final 2 weeks before her retirement. Jane was dumbfounded and went into panic mode. "But I didn't retire. I'm not ready to retire." Sandy responded that indeed she had retired, given her notice, and had proof of it in writing. All Jane could do was continue repeating, "But I didn't retire. I'm not ready to retire," while unsuccessfully attempting to get the support of the other employee who refused to come to her defense. Sandy then pointed to the box containing Jane's belongings, wished her a happy retirement, and told her to leave the office. Jane quickly rifled through the box and noticed that the small box containing the index cards with client information was not there. She insisted that Sandy return it to her, to which Sandy refused, explaining it was property of the business, contained personal client information, and that she would be in violation of Canadian privacy laws if she were to let Jane take it. Jane's shock had now turned to obstinance, and she refused to leave without the box. Both the other employee and Sandy's boyfriend had started to get involved, repeatedly telling Jane to just leave. Sandy then informed Jane that if she didn't leave, they would have to call the RCMP, Canadian Police, At which point, Sandy's boyfriend dialed 911 to inform the dispatcher of a disgruntled former employee at XYZ travel agency who was refusing to leave the premises. Within a few minutes, 2 police officers arrived, and Jane immediately ran to the door, ranting about being fired and about the missing box of client info. In order to de-escalate the situation, one police officer told Jane to come outside and explain to him her side of the story. The other officer remained in the office to hear Sandy's side, agreeing that Jane was not legally entitled to the box of client info. The other officer then re-entered the business and told Jane to wait outside. He said that Jane was insisting that Sandy was holding on to her personal belongings, namely a box of important information. Both Sandy and the officer who had spoken to her explained the context of the box to the other officer, who in turn agreed it was not Jane's property. The police officers then picked up the larger box of Jane's personal belongings, took it outside to Jane, and told her she needed to go home. To rub salt in Jane's wounds, the next day, Sandy put up a large sign in the window of the business congratulating Jane on her retirement, and even put a small announcement in the local newspaper doing the same thing. The icing on the piece of revenge cake was Sandy, when filling out the necessary government forms, so when an employee quits, gets fired, or retires, made sure to check the box labelled retired for the reason for Jane no longer being employed. By doing so, Jane was ineligible to collect unemployment insurance benefits. And there we go, a lovely little story of revenge to start today's episode. I've got to say, it must be pretty terrifying when you have a horrible employee like this person, like Jane, and you know their track record. You know that if you fire them or let them go, they're going to do everything in their power to sue you, and you know, they've got a good track history. They've won before, they might financially ruin you. How terrifying would that be as their boss? So the fact that you have her explicitly saying that I'm going to retire is just so good. I love that you lawyered up to make sure that everything was legal. I love that you got your boyfriend in there for a little bit of muscle. And I love that he called the police as well. Because why not? Get this swine gone. You did. And now she's in the mud. Good stuff. Want some free gas? I got you, bro. So, several years ago, my friend and I, we'll call him Boris, would always help each other do the spring cleanup for our properties. This included taking out damaged trees, preparing garden plots, and taking care of our weed-infested yards. I was going to be first on the cleanup detail, so I prepared tools and implements the Friday before the big cleanup was to happen. Sharpening tools and chainsaw chains, lawnmower blade, and just getting everything in order. Among those tasks was mixing 2-cycle oil. Finished up kind of late and generally put things away for the next day. The next morning, Boris shows up with coffee and biscuits at around 8 AM. As we were sitting on his tailgate enjoying breakfast, my neighbors ride by in their beat-to-heck Chevy Cavalier, smoking like a freight train. We'll call them Rocky and Bullwinkle. Boris and I made the usual jokes about the amount of smoke pouring from the exhaust. Dang, bet they go to the gas station and fill up with oil and check the gas. We soon finished breakfast and thought no more about it. As we begin to get the tools laid out and hash out a plan of attack, I cannot find my gas cans. No mixed gas, regular gas, or a gas can in general. That's when it dawned on us why the car Rocky and Bullwinkle were driving was smoking so bad. I'm fuming to say the least. Well, all Boris and I could do was go shopping for gas cans, gas, and more 2-cycle oil. After we returned, we saw Rocky and Bullwinkle pass by several times, but all in all, we got a lot done. The next weekend, we dedicated to clean up at Boris's. A weekend or two go by, and we have a family dinner at my wife's, Rocky, and Bullwinkle's grandparents. Oh, okay, I guess your wife is cousins with Rocky and Bullwinkle. Towards the latter part of the evening, we were having a few drinks. Most people had left, and myself and my wife's grandfather were shooting the breeze when I had to take a leak. As I was doing so, I saw a gas can with very distinct paint on it. I inquired from the old man about how it came into his possession, and he stated that Rocky and Bullwinkle left it there. I simply explained it was mine, as was another, and loaded them into my truck. It ate at me every time that POS car with my post neighbors went by. So I hatched a plan from a rotten egg. I went and bought a few gallons of gas, a few gallons of diesel fuel, and some other various oils. I made a concoction of these different chemicals and filled my new 6-gallon gas can I had to purchase. With some clean gas, I filled the lawnmower and cut some grass that evening, making sure Rocky and Bullwinkle saw me. Then I put everything away, but forgot and left that rotten egg gas can out. I got up and went to work the next morning and didn't even think to check on the can. But when I got home, I checked and it was gone. My wife informed me that my plan must have worked, as she watched Rocky and Bullwinkle go in and out with the car not only smoking, but spitting and sputtering as well. The last time they rode out, they didn't ride back in. They gave me about an hour of peace before they came over and wanted to know if I could look at the car and see what was wrong. If it could not be fixed on the side of the road, maybe tow it home. My response? I've had a long day and I've got a migraine. Maybe tomorrow. I saw the panic set in when I told them that. That's when they told me they had no insurance and it was on a main road. Tough luck. So the highway patrol did run across it and had it towed. It was going to cost them around $500 to get it out of impound, plus they had to have current registration and insurance. The car just wasn't worth that. Well, they're those type of people that good luck just falls on them, and the pastor for a local church gave them an old Taurus. It took me a few cans of rotten egg gas, but I got the motor to lock up after about a month. This time it quit in their grandparents' yard. So they scrapped that, and as luck would have it, they got their income tax returns. They bought a nice looking Ford F-150, but it began having problems too. Smoked really bad. They did take it to a mechanic that eventually found the problem. He got the truck running right again for about $1,500, and I've never had any more gas come up missing. Thanks for reading. So you're telling me you totaled 2 motors and cost these guys over $2,000? Just for something that they did. That is some pro-revenge right there, and that is what I love to see. You know what's mental is it took them a long time to realize what was going on there. It took them 2 cars, plus kind of their first one I guess as well, to understand that they were just being absolutely done by you. You knew what they were doing the whole time, and to be fair, good karma for stealing. You shouldn't be allowed to get away with this, and they didn't. Pro-army revenge is par for the course. Dear reader, I had an illustrious 21-year career in the United States Army, which miraculously concluded with an honorable discharge. 21 years and 14 combat deployments produce a lifetime of stories. The overwhelming majority of memories are comical and worth remembering, like the time I barrowed another human's truck, or the time I relocated an artillery display in my barracks room. However, some memories are extra ammunition after a live fire exercise, worth donating to Chuck and Barry. Memories suppressed so well they never happened. However, these memories can be unintentionally triggered. I worked at the bad place before attending assessment and selection. Working there was the sole reason for attending selection. The bad place was a 3-star command and nursing home for dying careers. It was a mixture of National Guard, Army Reserve, active duty, and Department of the Army civilians. It was essentially a foreign planet for a soldier who'd grown up in regiment and the 82nd Airborne Division. Overnight, I transitioned from airborne infantry to the equipment tracking officer. It was my sole purpose in life to source pre-deployment training equipment for deploying National Guard and Army Reserve units. These units would request specific types of equipment, and it was my responsibility to source at least 2/3 of the requested equipment. I should mention that my boss at the bad place was Department of the Army Civilian. I had 10 years of service under my belt, and it was the first time my direct supervisor was a civilian. Now, I've got no issues with civilians, but I do have issues with horrible leadership. And Mike was horrible. Mike was a dirty diaper, full of poop, and always on my butt. Guys, I had no earthly idea what my job was, or how I was to perform it initially. Making matters worse, I would quickly learn that Mike had no earthly idea either. Mike only knew what Z, final products, looked like, and was mentally unaware of the other 25 letters in the alphabet. Mike was less useful than blinker fluid and football bats. Fear not though, guys. It only took 3 months of working from 5 AM to 11 AM to garner a nascent understanding of my roles and responsibilities. Thankfully, I had wonderful counterparts at sister organisations. Furthermore, they were all equally aware of how useful Mike was. Fast forward 4 months. The section was still composed of exactly one sloppy, that is OP's name. I was 25% of the total allotted manpower, performing 100% of the duties. If you wait until the last minute, it only takes a minute, was my battle cry. Life was grand. I developed standard operating procedures and automated matrices to assist me. I was even starting to catch errors from the department that validates equipment requests. Remember guys, it was my duty to source 2/3 of the equipment request. I had a very unpleasant one-way conversation in August of 2011. My captain, Richard Cranium, was requesting I provide 3 Rhino buses for training. I kindly explained why fulfilling this request was unfeasible. Problem solved, right? Nope. I then received a call from Lieutenant Colonel Richard Cranium. The issue quickly became a self-licking ice cream cone of chaos. Ring, ring, ring. I answer. The bad place, G4 Equipment Tracking Officer. This is Rank Sloppy speaking. How may I help you, sir or ma'am? This is Major General Richard Cranium from the California National Guard. Side note, guys, the Major General is the boss idiot for all National Guard soldiers in the state of California. I do not get calls from general officers ever. How can I help you, sir? He's angry. I'm calling to inquire as to why you will not fulfill our equipment request. Is it not your policy to provide 2/3? I was now a bit agitated. I clearly explained the issue to the company commander, battalion commander, and brigade commander. I now have an irate god-level commander on the phone, and 2 courses of action are cycling through my mind. I could explain why this request was absurd, or I could go full regiment sloppy. Sir, I clearly explained to the previous commanders why I cannot fulfill their request, and provided other options. I don't want options, sloppy. I want my 3 rhino buses. At this point, I just took on a time to get fired attitude. Roger, sir. Well, as I told the previous commanders, there are only 5 rhino buses that exist on Earth. 3 of them are deployed to Iraq, and the other 2 are in Afghanistan. Do you wish for me to forward this equipment request to Forces Command? Oh, that won't be necessary. Thanks, sloppy. Are you sure, sir? I mean, I can. No. Did you explain this to... Yes, every single one of them, sir. Disregard. I have some phone calls to make. And guys, the world was right again. At least I thought it was. It appears the Major General was slow to contact his subordinate leadership. The Colonel had contacted Mike, demanding I supply his unit with rhino buses. One would think a simple explanation would suffice for Mike, but one would be wrong. Common sense is an elusive, fickle creature for Mike. It was like trying to explain what number the letter purple tastes like. Mike said, "Did you tell a unit they can't have a piece of equipment?" "Yes, sir." "Why?" "Because there are only 5 of them, and they're all deployed to combat zones." "Well, you need to figure out how to get them." In my brain, I'm thinking, oh my god, is this man freaking serious? I laughed to myself. I think he is. What? Okay, so like call the Pentagon and ask them to redeploy them from combat because some unit needs to train with them? It's not your job to validate equipment, it's your job to source it. Do you understand? Roger that, sir. Guys, when one door closes, check for an open window. I had over 90 units on my desk and 32,000 pieces of equipment to source for the month of August. It didn't take long to find a window to crawl out. I found a unique request from an infantry unit. They requested a plethora of equipment and it all made sense, minus 4 pieces of equipment. I thought, I'm pretty sure those 4 pieces of equipment need to be on a different type of request, right? Yeah, but it's not your job to validate it. Oh, right. Guys, I sourced it. All 4 of them. It was not an easy task either. I literally had to scour the entire country for available inventory. I made phone call after phone call to make this request happen. None of the items were collocated. They would need to be transported from the far stretches of the continental United States, and failure was not an option. I had fulfilled my responsibilities. I sourced the equipment and turn it over to Mike for signature. Mike's signature magically allocates funding and authorizes the transportation of said equipment. Dear reader, poop typically rolls downhill. However, this specific request defied the laws of gravity. Poop was going to roll uphill. I crawled back through the window and waited a month for the fallout to ensue. Truth be told, due to my heavy workload, I'd forgotten about my magnificent accomplishment. It was another horrible day at work until I received this magical phone call. The bad place, G4 Equipment Tracking Officer. This is rank sloppy speaking. How may I help you, sir or ma'am? Hello, I am Sergeant First Class Ricky Bobby. I am the Long Range Surveillance Platoon Sergeant for this unit. Hey Ricky, how can I help you? Well, I'm looking at 4 helicopters and I'm told I need to sign for them. Let me look at your request. Yes, you requested 2 UH-60L Black Hawk helicopters and 2 UH-47 Chinook helicopters, correct? Yes, but I requested them for SPIES, Special Purpose Insertion Extraction System, and FRIES, Fast Rope Insertion Extraction System training. I am not a pilot. What the heck am I supposed to do with 4 helicopters? I mean, once you sign for them, they're yours. I suppose you could try to fly them? Oh, the frickin' army. I suppose I could. Don't worry, man. I've got your back. I have already coordinated with our aviation validators to support your request. I'll give you their number. I'm ready to copy. 867-5309. Thanks, man. Call me back if you have any issues, brother. I'll walk upstairs, G3 operations, and get this sorted so you boys can do your SPIES and FRIES. We'll comply, man. Guys, not only does poop roll uphill, but poop rolls uphill faster than I expected. I just hung up the phone and was departing for lunch. I didn't make it 5 feet before I was beckoned to Mike's office. There are 4 chairs in Mike's office, one with a load-bearing capacity of at least 400 pounds, and 4 normal people chairs. I was awkwardly surprised to find it was already standing room only. The G4 Colonel, Deputy G4, and G3 Operations Colonel were already in Mike's office. Mike says, "It seems we have an issue, Sloppy." In my brain, I think, we? I say, really? I'm not aware of any issues, sir. Well, a unit is at Fort Hood, and the battalion commander is wondering why one of his platoon sergeants signed for 4 helicopters. I'm shocked. Did they request 4 helicopters? I can go and get the equipment request. No, I have it right here in my hands. Okay, did they request? Yes, they did. I don't understand that. Look, the issue is, says the colonel, that we needlessly shipped 4 helicopters across the United States. There are already helicopters at Fort Hood. Helicopters and pilots there to support Spies and Fries training. They are there specifically for this type of request. Sloppy, did this request not look odd to you? At this moment in my head, I am laughing hysterically. Absolutely, sir, I reply. The entire room has shocked faces, just baffled as frick. Then why did you source it? Sir, as I understand it, it's not my job to validate, it's my job to source it. Mike made it very clear on multiple occasions. Oh, Sloppy, do you realize you just cost the army over $100,000 to ship equipment that we didn't need to ship? But sir... No, Mike, says the colonel. You just cost the army over $100,000. Sir? Mike, it is your signature that authorizes allocation of money and shipping. Did you tell Sloppy it's his job to source, to not validate anything and only source? Well, sir, I did, but... The colonel starts walking out. Mike, let's have a meeting in my office. A quick side note, I know the other colonel. We'd worked in the same unit when he was a major. He follows me out, sits on my desk, and starts laughing hysterically. How in the frick did you do it? Do what? I ask. Find 4 helicopters. I called everyone. I leveraged my network of contacts and made it my mission. What does your counterpart say about the request? Well, they have the same sentiments as me towards Mike. Oh, honestly, that's impressive. Well, sir, I was gonna get pooped on either way, so I decided, screw Mike. Yep, screw Mike, I guess. Guys, thank you for reading my pro-army revenge. I have good news. I no longer work for Mike after that interaction. Other misdeeds, stories, came to light after that encounter. I had a long desk side meeting with the G4 colonel and fully detailed my relationship with Mike. It's nearly impossible to fire Department of the Army civilians, but it was easy to move me. The other colonel found a more suitable position for an infantryman. It also sucked, but he gave me ample time to prepare for assessment and selection. I was at the bad place for 18 horrible months before I found greener pastures. I could lament on all the horrible things, but it's not worth it. Why? At least I know where to go if I ever need 4 frickin' helicopters. So I guess the too long didn't read there. It's just screw Mike. What a terrible bloke. I'm happy he got found out, but my word, imagine working under someone like that. I do feel for all of you that have terrible bosses. It must be just so toxic. Gotta say, shout out Sloppy on this one. Love your writing style, great story. Now to end today's episode, I've got a story of nuclear revenge from you. And let me tell you, you're not gonna wanna miss this one. Here we go. Landlord tries to defraud us and ends up losing his visa instead. This happened a long time ago, but I recently found out about the end results and figured that it might belong here. If you've never heard of the US EB-5 visa program, then don't worry, I hadn't either. From what little research I've gathered, this is essentially a program where foreign nationals can fast-track US residency visa status by contributing financially to approved community investment projects. I don't think that these specifics are that relevant, but feel free to add if I've missed anything important. So, when my husband and I were still dating and first looked for a place to live together, we settled on a small townhouse. It was old and needed work, but the rent was reasonable, and it was in a neighborhood that we liked. The landlord had recently purchased the property but didn't live there and wanted renters to help pay for the mortgage, I assume. We found the house on a realty website. It had been sold less than a month before we moved in and still had photographs posted by the seller. This will be important for later. We liked the place, applied and got accepted. We moved in and lived happily ever after. The end. No, but seriously, the landlord left us alone. We lived there for a few years, paid rent on time, never had issues until we moved out. We had to pay nearly $5,000 in refundable security deposits, and when we moved out, our landlord repaid half. We were confused, as the lease laid out the steps the landlord had to take in order for them to keep the deposits. Central to that requirement, the landlord had 45 days to provide us with an itemized list of damages we caused, as well as the cost to fix each thing. 45 days came and went, and no itemized list. So we contacted them and asked for the list. We received a mostly blank one-page invoice for $2,500 to repaint, remove TV mounts, patch holes, etc. It wasn't itemized and there were no individual charges, so we asked for pictures of the alleged damages. The landlord immediately got hostile and refused. So we filed suit. The landlord hired an attorney to represent him, and the attorney submitted an itemized list as well as pictures. We printed date-stamped copies of the photos posted by the previous realtor, the same photos submitted by the landlord's clueless lawyer. The clerk overseeing the matter found in our favour immediately. Because the landlord had lied about the photographic evidence, the landlord was also found to be in breach of contract and was assessed treble damages plus interest, penalties, and court costs. Yay for us. But he didn't pay, so we submitted to a collection agency. I don't really understand the particulars. We eventually recovered most of the final judgment, so we were happy and left it at that. Until, unbeknownst to us, the landlord was an EB5 applicant. Apparently, the breach of contract, collection, and shenanigans surrounding the dishonesty regarding the lawsuit made it back to whomever was reviewing their visa application. There were other issues too, I'm sure. The landlord's visa application was denied. He ended up having to cash out of his US investments and won't be eligible for this visa again. The final outcome was an unintended consequence, but I kind of feel like he got what he deserved. You see, it's people like this that just give landlords everywhere a terrible name. Why do this? Especially in the knowledge that you are currently applying for a visa, and if you get found out for something like this, which is fraudulent, you're going to be in jeopardy and probably not get it. Like, why do that? You don't deserve one because you're a fraud, but still, what goes through your head at that point to think, yeah, I know I'm in this kind of perilous position here that it could all go downhill for me if something happens, but I'm going to risk it all for this anyway. Like, what you've been gaining, a few $1,000s, is that really worth it? No. Make my co-workers cry? I will help karma turn your life upside down. Backstory. I worked at this hotel for over 2 years and was one of 2 people left that went through the training when our hotel changed hotel franchises. During this training, we were told about certain rules the company had. On to the story. One afternoon, I was scheduled to work second shift 3 to 11. I walked in and both AM front desk co-workers looked like they'd been massively crying as their makeup was smeared. My manager looked quite angry. I ask, what's wrong? My manager replies, we have a major jerk as a guest. This guy is the highest level on the rewards for the hotel chain. He's very demanding and wants free upgrades, free this or that, and screams anytime he has an interaction with the staff. This guy has made every department call me complaining about him. Now he just came to the desk and screamed at these 2 co-workers until they both were crying. These 2 ladies were fresh high school graduates and were very sweet and innocent people. They loved helping people and didn't deserve this treatment. As he's explaining this, I look up this guy's room details. My manager finishes explaining everything this guy had done. I see this guy's info and I got a smile from ear to ear. I reply, didn't you see he is an employee of a different hotel? Yeah, but so what? Said my manager. Well, first off, while you travel as an employee, you are required to behave and be respectful. It's in the fine print on the discount form. I grabbed this form and showed it to the manager. Failure to be respectful can lead to having your employee discount suspended or permanently revoked and even get you terminated. You need to call this guy's hotel and ask for the GM, then explain to him who you are and what this guy is doing. I look up the hotel phone number and call the hotel and then handed my manager the phone. My manager ends his call with their GM and has an evil and satisfying smile on his face. His GM is steaming mad after I described all the stuff this guy has done. Then the main switchboard phone rings. I answered. Hello, thank you for calling the hotel. How may I direct your call? The caller says, put me through to the entitled jerk's room, please. I replied, absolutely, sir. Have a nice day. I transferred the call and looked at my manager and say with a sarcastic tone, someone wanted to talk to the entitled jerk. Gee, I wonder who that could be. My manager continues after he stopped laughing. The GM gave me his personal cell phone number and said if I have any more issues at all to call him immediately. I'm leaving the phone number next to the switchboard. If you need it, call him. I told my manager, your revenge is done, now for mine. Oh, what are you gonna do? He replied, wide-eyed. I smile a very evil smile. You'll see. I pick up the phone to make a call. Hello, Hotel Rewards customer service. Yes, I would like to report somebody using a reward account while using an employee discount at his stay. The customer service replies, he can't do that. Yeah, I know. I'm calling to report him. I gave her the guest reservation number and rewards member number. I continued. I bet anything, if you dig through this guy's history, you'll find all of his stays are probably at employee discount. Okay, I'm starting a ticket to have this guy's account investigated, they said. Thank you, I replied. Then I hang up the phone. My manager watched as I then remove his rewards number from his stay. My manager had a huge grin on his face. That was awesome. I explain, oh, I'm not quite finished with him yet. It's time to go and spread the news to all departments that he is no longer a rewards member. I made a new key for his room without concierge access. I walked around to every department. As I explained why I was stopping by, everyone had the same reaction as soon as I mentioned the guy's name. Oh god, what about this butthole now? I finished explaining that he was no longer a reward member, and if he gives anyone issues, to call the front desk immediately, and his general manager already probably tore him a new one just a minute ago. Everyone was so happy at this news. I finally went to the concierge room and used the guest's new key to void his current key. Then I walked into the room and explained the information to the evening concierge. She cringed at the mention of his name. After explaining that she would not have to deal with him again, and asking her to leave the morning person a note about this guy not being allowed in the concierge room anymore, she was very happy. While I was gone, evidently the manager explained what we did to the 2 a.m. front desk ladies. The minute I got back to the desk, both my front desk co-workers came up to me and gave me a huge hug, thanking me so many times. After my other co-workers went home, my manager said to me, "Do me a huge favor, please." I replied, "Sure, what's up? If I ever anger you, please come and tell me so I can fix the issue." Later that night, the entitled jerk comes to the desk, hat in hand, politely saying his key doesn't work. I replied, "Oh, I'm so sorry about that. Let me make you a new key," in the best fake smile that I can muster. Aftermath. The next day, I check his rewards accounts and it's now suspended. I check back next week. Sorry. Account number not found. Wow, I think that is the definition of pro-revenge there. All completely legal, so well thought out. You knew exactly what you were doing in the same way that this guy had no idea what he was doing. You would have thought that someone that's exploiting two things at once who works in the industry might understand what they were doing and know that they're probably going to get caught at some point, but maybe he thought he was too clever for his own good, and he was. Let's be honest. Craziest thing about this story, in my opinion, is that it's so weird that someone that works in the same job as everyone else that he is abusing and being horrible to could do that, could act in that sort of way. Surely he knows what it's like to deal with entitled people in general and people that are just horrible to you at work. He works in that role in his own job, yet he's the one that's doing it to other workers at another hotel, a very similar one to his. I don't get that. Surely he'd have a little bit of passion for people that are pretty much your colleagues, but no, good karma, fully deserved. You're an idiot. I was able to simultaneously gain a 30k per year pension for my mother while wiping my POS father's retirement. My father is the Canadian Satan. Growing up with him was less than fun, and I can assure you, based on witnessing it, he was a less than fun husband. I'd go on about what a POS my father is, but instead I'll quote a judge. "You're the most despicable human I've ever had in my courtroom." And that's coming from a family court judge. I read this whining endorsement of my dad's personality in the court documents I acquired related to his divorce with my mum. The same place I discovered the crazy stuff that he'd engaged in to steal from my mum. It's also where I found the information I needed to get one over on him, so severely that he's going to disinherit me. A frame of reference about my father is that he's a pathological narcissist and behaves exactly how those people are compelled to act. They aren't generous people, and punching them in the wallet is like a slap shot to the taint from Gretzky. He's kind of like Donkey from Shrek, but also Joseph Stalin, a monstrous jackass. Chapter 1, Hosea 3:8. Those that sow the wind shall reap a whirlwind. Our actions always have consequences, and my father has plenty to answer for. My attempts to hold him to account didn't jump to immediate jihad. They started with diplomacy and a therapist. About 10 months ago, when our tale begins, I was going through some stuff. Stuff being a whole lot of PTSD related to both my dad's abuse and my job as a paramedic. He did a ton that affected me deeply, things that I needed to move past, along with all that other razzmatazz from 15 years of EMS. In so trying to move past and work through everything, I quit drinking, started turning my untreated PTSD into treated PTSD, and thinking having my dad involved might help me and our relationship. Well, I seriously frickin' misjudged that one, so you'll probably be unsurprised to hear that conversation went swimmingly. I'll spare you the lurid detail, but when I broached the subject with him, our back and forth degenerated into visceral hate, with him screaming at me that I'm a failed paramedic, liar, and POS alcoholic. While I have a certain pride about my job, I have more pride in my 14-month sobriety. So hearing this from my old man might have caused me to behave a little bit psychotically. I got right annoyed at him and decided to dig up every bit of dirt I could, see what kind of man he actually is and has been. When it was convenient, I hopped in the mystery machine before taking a trip to the courthouse to unleash my inner gumshoe. Everything is public record, so I bulk bought copies before retiring to my easy chair to read, plot, and pet my white long-haired cats. For good measure, I obtained a file of divorce document from my mother. Soon enough, I hit upon a line of inquiry worth following up on. It seems that during the final settlement of my parents' divorce, this was in 2002, my mother was awarded 1/3 of my father's employment pension. She was a stay-at-home mother and could not earn one herself, so it was given to her by a judge. Mighty frickin' strange, because my father, as he brags, took a nearly full pension and retired a bit early. There's no way that guy was living the last 10 years after retiring early on a 2/3 pension. He isn't constantly complaining about it. So I asked my mother if she was collecting a pension from his job or had cashed out the value, 100k plus at the time, 20 years ago. The answer was no to both questions. Well, that's interesting. I wonder if that's collectible on and what 20 years of compound interest from a pension fund makes it worth. Well, I did eventually find out, along with the fact that my dear old dad had been collecting my mother's portion for 10 years, in hilariously open violation of a legal order from a judge. Why didn't my mother pursue this sooner? A combination of being unable to afford a lawyer, being his victim for 20 years, and pessimism after so much of his continued dodging obligation to the order. She just quit. There is effectively no statute of limitations that he could hide behind because of the wording of the document. Insofar as I could tell, I had him dead to rights, and my mother would be collecting. It would be a slam dunk. I just needed to hire a lawyer to help me. So I set out to find the most unbalanced, bloodthirsty, psychotic who passed the bar exam. Chapter 2. And your pension lady? As it says in the good book, screw unto others as they would screw unto you. So that's what I set out to do. The misanthropic sociopath I hired for legal counsel suggested we send a demand letter to the pension office to try and remedy it before filling what would undoubtedly be an easy win for him. I agreed in spirits and instead phoned up the pension office and got put through to the woman managing my father's file. Well, she was a delight, and it was a trivial matter for me to get her to loathe my dad. We talked for 45 minutes, and I swear if you'd given me another hour, I could have convinced her to suicide bomb his house. In all our conversations about life, families, and relationships, we got down to some things of note. Since I could show her correspondence her office had sent to my father, CC'd my mum on, from some years ago and ongoing for 5 consecutive years, trying to resolve this matter, which he'd ignored, she was more than willing to start the process on remedy immediately. Full cooperation from this lady and her office was a matter of merely providing documentation, and with my lawyer on retainer, this office was beyond asking my father to comply. They complied for him. About 2 months since I last spoke to my father, and he had no idea his pension was about to take a serious hit. Below, I'm going to break down how big a turd I put into his bowl of ice cream. My mother's portion was made whole and adjusted to reflect that her portion was brought to maturity and beyond, so his early retirement doesn't affect her fund. So he loses 10 years of valuation to her. He also retired 3 years early, which knocks him down now to 17 years of pension valuation, not 27. If you've forgotten, my dad had been collecting my mum's money and was overpaid by 30k per year for the last 10 years. Like I said, mum was made whole, so the pension company is going to claw back that overpayment from the base valuation of his current pension fund. I'm not exactly sure what that does to the number, but it effectively nerfs my old man's private retirement fund. He does though have government old age pension, but he took that early too. Whoops. My dad did some awful stuff to me, but I only had to suffer 17 years of him. My mum still has the high score at 20. As much as I did this for spite and malicious glee, I did do it also to give my mum a chance at a proper retirement. Chapter 3. Glitter Bombs of Justice. My mother started collecting her pension about 3 months after I contacted the pension office, and to celebrate, she bought tickets to New Zealand for the family for Christmas, so that we can see our relatives. I was able to get most of my retainer from the lawyer back, and to celebrate, I went online to order a glitter bomb. I was able to ship it to my old man anonymously from another country. God bless the USA. I heard through my sister that he opened it up in his stupid red Miata. Oh god, he'll never get rid of it. Okay, as I was reading that story, I'm not gonna lie, I was trying to do the maths as I was going, and I couldn't do it because I'm stupid, but goodness me, that's a lot of money. Let's just try it quickly, come on, give me the benefit of the doubt here. 30k per year for 10 years, that's about 300,000, right? That's the first lump sum. And then on top of that, I can't be able to work it out, but all the compound interest that you're talking about, the stuff that the pension fund must have made, the fact that your dad's had money taken out of his government pension fund as well, and all the stuff that he's had to pay back. It's not looking good, is all I will say. I hope that your mum has a much better retirement and old age life than your dad, because it's what she deserves. You know what's super unnecessary as well, but I actually love the glitter bomb at the end. Like, you've made so much money out of this man. Rightfully so, I will say. Like, it's your mum's money, but still, you've got so much money back. But no, just to be petty, right at the bitter end, you're like, nah, screw it. I'm sending him a glitter bomb as well, just to really ruin his day. And he opens it in his car as well to compound his misery. I love it. This will be a long one, so grab some popcorn. Let me start with a little background. I am a 28-year-old man, and my wife is 26. We married 3 years ago, and we've been together for 6 years total. When we met, I was already in my 3rd year of college for a special branch of a very productive industry, something like the US Army. You go to a different country for a few months, do some really dangerous jobs, get paid a lot, come back for a few months, and so on. In the beginning, I was going for 6, 8, or even 10 months at a time in order to promote as fast as possible. Now, I earn around 4 years of medium salary in my country in just 3 months. It's a hard job, but I love it. My wife was very supportive, and I always knew that it's very hard for her to have this kind of lifestyle. I always try to spoil her and compensate her for my time spent away with tons of gifts and trips to exotic places. 2 years ago, when I came home after an extended contract, I had to stay almost 2 more months because all flights and borders got shut down during COVID, but I did get an extra 20% salary during this time. She told me she can't take it anymore. She goes crazy alone at home and she has nothing to do. She lost her job during COVID and didn't want to work again after that, which I fully support because I want her to be happy and money wasn't a problem. I was petrified, and at first I believed that she'd want to break up. Then she continued with, "I love you so much and I want you to give me a baby so I can take care of him and have a little bit of you when you are gone on your contracts." After 5 months of hard work with no women in a 100-kilometer range, making a baby was done very fast. And multiple times, just to be sure, if you know what I'm talking about. I was nervous for the first month because we always feared we may not be able to make a baby. For the first 4 years, we didn't use any kind of protection except pull out, and she never got pregnant. But after a few weeks, she wakes me up with a long kiss and a smile on her face, then shows me her test results. I was the happiest man alive. Everything changed. I was a man now. I was a father. I was on top of the world. I was going with her to every doctor appointment, and during my contract, I was asking for ultrasounds instead of nudes. The birth had no complications and everything went amazingly. 1 month later, I go on another contract to make some money that should cover every need for our little baby. Halfway during this contract, I receive a text from my wife which shattered my life. The text was short and simple, and I would never forget those 4 words that were sent to me in the deepest depression I'd ever had. "I want a divorce." I didn't understand. I tried to call her to find out what happened, and nothing. After a few days of talking back and forth, she said, "I want a divorce so I can marry with the love of my life." I was already preparing my suitcase because I'd made a request to my company to send me back as an emergency. When I got home, she and the baby were gone. 2 weeks later, I was in court to settle the divorce. During this time, I found out that she's had a lover for well over 4 years and she plans to marry him as soon as the divorce is done. Now, the laws in my country are different, and I knew that my first priority should be a really good lawyer. My wife had a really trashy one, and she decided to speak by herself without the help of the lawyer most times. Her whole idea was, "I'm a woman and he is never home." Well, even if the laws usually favor women in my country, cheating is considered to be a break of contracts, the wedding contracts. And she wanted to take full custody of our children in order for me to pay child support. I was not letting this happen. I speak with my lawyer and an accountant, and it seems that I only had to pay child support from my base salary. My bonus is not included in child support because it's for my life risk and it's mine alone. And because the company pays less taxes on that danger bonus, I have a lot of them, and my base salary is around 10% of my income. When she found out that she would take almost nothing from child support, and I gave her the option of me taking full custody of the child with a no contact rule, and I'll never ask her for child support, she agreed in a second. Basically, she agreed to get out of our lives. We even changed the birth certificate of the child to me, the father, and just a blank space for the mother. She gave up any kind of claim on the baby. During the trial, her lover was asked to come as a witness, and the idiot agreed. He is an AliExpress version of Andrew Tate. An alpha man who treats women like trash, and this seems to turn her on, and he's got a pretty good income and has a small company. Yeah, less than half my salary, but he's always home, and it's still a lot for our country. Now, during the trial, he said they cheated behind my back for 3 years and that the baby is his and that she tricked me to make her a baby in order to not find out about her cheating. He said all this just to make me feel horrible, I guess, because this is actually kind of illegal. Something like alienating love and other law terms that my lawyer explained to me. He basically said that he knew that I was married but decided to ruin the marriage anyway. Now, at this point, the child situation was already done and an agreement was signed. The judge asked my wife if it was true, and she said yes and ordered a DNA test just to confirm. After the DNA test confirmed what they'd said, the judge said that she'll let me cancel the agreement and settle the situation again with my wife now that the child is not biologically mine. I said, "No, Your Honor, the child is mine and I want to keep him." The judge was stunned for a minute, but then she said, "Well, if the agreement is a valid contract, and since you don't want to void it, then OP, you are a father, and no one can take that child away from you. Now, in my country, it doesn't matter who the biological parent is, it matters who the parent is on the documents. And since my wife's lover knew he was the father from the beginning, but didn't come to the hospital to declare it, he automatically cancelled all of his paternal claims." It sounds stupid, but it makes sense. It's in order to protect the idea of a family, and if a man recognizes a fatherless child at the hospital, he shouldn't fear that the biological father will come back. It's in order to protect the value of family and encourage people to do a good thing and start a family and things like that. Now the divorce was over, I got my baby, and my wife was out of my life. The first thing I did was to hire 3 babysitters to work 8 hours a day, so my child has 24/7 someone to stay with him, and I have time to prepare my revenge. I started 2 separate companies with the help of an online assistant from India. You can hire them kind of cheap and they do whatever you need online. This guy made 2 super professional companies This guy made 2 super professional companies, one in industrial credits, giving money to businesses for a lower rate than banks, and the second one was a copycat of my ex-company, but this one was in the same city as his. Both were made just for one client, my ex-wife's lover. My assistant started sending tons of ads for my credit company to him. Emails targeted Google, FB ads, etc. I was sure that he knows that if he needs money, this is the place he can take a lot with low rates. Next, I made a lot of advertisements on the second company. But the company had only the machines and the rented space and only one worker, the cleaning lady. Every time somebody called for the company services, they got immediately declined because we're overbooked. My ex's lover, let's call him Dan, was one of them. Multiple times actually, and he got mad every time he got rejected because he sees how big the competition is. Now it was the time to give him the bait. Because my company had some problems in the main country, I don't even know in which country this company was registered, they changed the management and wanted to make some fast profit, so the regional manager wanted to sell some of the equipments. When Dan heard this, he started calling and sending emails to buy them out. The response was something like, "We are an international company. We can't sell the brand, but we can sell some equipments." It was illegal for me to sell the company without showing him the accountant's data, which was empty of course. But equipments I could just sell with a simple contract. He wanted the competition out of his city. He did not need the equipment. So the manager gave him a deal. If you buy our equipment for let's say 3 times the price, we can say in the contract that we won't do business again in this city. In just 2 hours, I received calls and emails to my first company for a credit for that equipment and blah blah. I knew that Dan was out of money because he spent a lot on his future wedding with my ex-wife. I sent him a contract. Based on our evaluation, the equipment is not worth that money, so he'll need to give us a guarantee from his company, and he's not allowed to sell any equipment or parts of his company until he pays everything back, and if he's behind on a payment for 6 months straight, I get all of it. Also in the contract, I stated that the credit company will buy that equipment directly. Basically, I just give myself my own money. And I made sure every single word of the contract was legal and a deal was good enough for him to take. Later that same day, he sent me the signed contract. Now, normally he should be able to pay for everything, even if the clients he hoped he will get from this company leaving are not existent. He still should be able to pay if he gives me around 80% of his company income for the next 5 years. Fast forward a bit. On the day of his wedding, I go to give him an envelope. In my country, you give money in envelopes as a wedding gift. He started to laugh at me and tell me to get out because I'm not invited and he doesn't need my money. I smiled and I told him to open it. He looked inside and saw that I was expecting him to come into court next week. He laughed and asked, "What is this?" And I told him, "See you in court. enjoy your wedding night. The next week he came. I was suing him for child support. As I said, in my country, if you're aware that you have a child and refuse to go to the hospital to recognize it, you are no longer the father, but you are still forced to pay child support, and it's actually an increased rate because you tried to dodge responsibility, like running from a car accident scene. He didn't want to pay, so he tried to say that he wants the child, or co-custody, that he's the biological and blood and whatever. This made me happy because I wanted to drag the trial on as much as possible to drain him of all of his money. But I couldn't after the judge saw all his declarations during the divorce trial. She ended the trial really quickly, forcing him to pay me 40% of his, and therefore his company's, income from the time the child was born until he finishes college or I get married. And guess who didn't manage to pay? And guess who is the new owner of his company? Now, I don't work anymore, I just run his company and spend almost all my time with my child. Alright, so let's quickly recap. You managed to get rid of your cheating wife, get rid of the AliExpress Andrew Tate, and also stop a child from having a terrible life with terrible parents. Oh, and on top of that, you made an unbelievable amount of money and you ruined a guy who just left his child at the hospital. What a win! Just looking through some of the comments now, people are saying how beautiful it is and how they hope that OP and the kid are doing great. And OP has said that they are doing great. They spend almost all their time together, except when he has to go to work for about 4 to 6 hours a day. But then the babysitter still come because he needs the help. He wants his kid to have some feminine energy in his life too. Yeah, it makes sense. Also, his parents are very supportive. I mean, it just sounds like a brilliant, relationship there. What a man. Fair play to you and your family. I just can't believe that for 4 years, your wife was cheating on you. I mean, look, I know it's not that uncommon, but 4 years, you away, obviously, but earning so much money to provide for her while she doesn't even work after COVID. Yeah, tough spot, but still, she's not actually earning any money. That's just a fact. Yet she's the one cheating on you. And obviously, look, it's hard for her when her husband is away for all that time. I get it, but it is kind of what she signed up for. I presume that you talked about doing this job and that you are going to be away for a long period of time. Embarrassing, but hey, that is the joy of life. That's for sure. Pay your tattoo artists. This happened when I was young. I heard it secondhand from my grandmother, who the main character of the cast lived with at the time. My uncle's ex-girlfriend was an all-around horrible person, an abusive babysitter. She got my uncle into bad crowds and legal trouble, and dabbled in so many substances from A to Z. She was also heavily tatted. There was an artist, the star of the story, who was a family friend. Great dude, insane work. She asked him to do a piece for her. Huge, intricate angel wings. Oh, the irony, across her back. He agrees. It takes several sessions across weeks. She repeatedly has to postpone payments, but he's chill, family friend, yada yada. Until it comes to the last session, when it slips that she still doesn't have the money, and more importantly, won't have the money, like ever. Now, the pro-revenge. No collection agency, no refusal to continue. He smiles, waves it off, and says he'll finish up, no charge. It's gonna be a great piece. Legendary, one for the history books, he guarantees. She is stoked. So right between those gorgeous wings, right up her spine, this idiot now has a massive veiny male appendage proudly standing at attention up her spine. She saw it in the mirror when he finished, and she was livid. But hey, what's she gonna do? She didn't pay him and wasn't going to pay him and expected hours and hours of work. You give a lot of trust to someone when they take a needle to your skin to lay down something permanent. Don't stiff your artists. The best thing about this revenge is that yes, although the tattoo artist isn't going to get compensated financially for his time, this woman is still going to have to spend loads of money, either getting this tattoo modified with some more artwork on top of it, or just getting it removed via laser removal. Either way, she's screwed. And there we go, guys. That is going to do it for some of the most brutal revenge stories I've read in the past 12 months or so. I mean, come on. Some of them truly traumatic is what I would say. Horrible? Too far? I don't know. I always wonder when I'm reading stuff like this, like, is this really worth it? Is this not a little bit too far given what's happened in the first place? Sometimes, clearly not. But sometimes I'm left thinking to myself, was that really necessary to go to that length? I don't know. It's up to you lot. Get in the comments, let me know. If you enjoyed the episode, drop a like on it if you're on YouTube. Follow, subscribe, whatever platform you're on. And also, click the link top line of the description to watch more right away.